Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is Protector of the Fairies in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Protector of the Fairies. A strange new world. The first sight the group saw as they exited the anima portal was the sky. For a brief moment they weren't sure if they had made it there correctly. It looked just like their own, and they almost believed that they had instead being transported elsewhere instead of making it through. That little illusion quickly shattered when they glanced further down, gasps of awe coming from even Gajeel. Were those islands flying? And how was the water traveling upwards? Was that even possible? Happy and Carla quickly navigated the group through the sky, rushing towards the ground before their magic ran out. Going through the anima had stolen a lot of their magic, but they would at least be able to recover it later on. They were meant to have been born in this world, so they should be able to refill their magic easily enough. They found a decently sized area in a nearby forest and decided it would be best to stop there before they went any further. The group touched down on the ground, Gajeel and Natsu releasing hold of their charges so they could stand on their own. Toshiro seemed glad to be finally out of the grip, adjusting his sword slightly so it was back where he liked it. "So," muttered Natsu as he looked around. "This is Edala's." "It's nothing special," commented Gajeel. "I've seen more impressive stuff elsewhere." "Then what was that look you had before for then?" "Shut up. See." Natsu glanced at Wendy, seeing her looking around in excitement. "Hey Wendy. You okay?" She nodded enthusiastically, her head not pausing to look at him as she talked. "Look at it all. Magic's flowing everywhere, even in such small amounts. And it's strange too. I've never seen magic this lively. Is that why the water is flowing upwards? Is that why gravity is weakened at places?" The three backed away from Wendy slightly as she shot off question after question, none of them having the answers she wanted and unsure whether she was going to get angry at them for not answering or if she would get captivated in just watching the magic. Carla raised her hand and coughed into it, snapping Wendy out of her excitement finally. "If you wouldn't mind." Wendy blushed, realizing she had gotten lost in what she had seen. "Ah. I'm sorry." Her head tilted slightly. "Why are you all so far away?" "No reason," Toshiro quickly answered, glancing around them to discourage her from asking any more. "So then, whereabout are we?" Gajeel joined him in what he was doing. "No idea." He quickly ran to one of the trees and started climbing, looking around once more as he reached the top. "Do you see anything?" Gajeel shook his head. "Not a thing. I didn't remember seeing anywhere nearby originally, but I had to be sure. No idea where the nearest site of civilization is. It could be days away for all we know." "Days? Shut up, salamander. I'm just guessing here." Natsu didn't take any comfort in that, quickly searching the area for anything he could find. He cheered in relief when he managed to find some oddly shaped fruit, holding it up like a trophy. "There is food here. We're saved." Wendy laughed at his antics while Toshiro only scowled. "That could be poisoned for all we know. I wouldn't eat it." "I'm not an idiot." Natsu glanced back at the fruit. "But we may need to take a risk if things get desperate. We can't exactly survive for very long if we don't find anything to eat, and water is a similar issue." Salamander's got a point. Gajeel jumped back down from the tree, landing in a crouch as he hit the ground. "If worst comes to worst, we may need to rely on Wendy to check it and then eat it afterwards." Wendy frowned. "Why do I need to check it? I can't tell if something is poisonous." "But you can cure it, yes." There was a small nod. "Then that's the best we can do. If you could cure the fruit, we could eat it even if it had been poisonous." "That." Wendy paused, thinking for a moment. "That might work thinking about it. I can't guarantee anything, however, as my magic is really meant to heal living creatures. Fruit could be classified as such if you think about it right, but I can't be sure how advanced something needs to be for my magic to work." "There's also the problem with our magic," reminded Toshiro. "We can't just waste it with stuff like this." "Then we better get moving." Gajeel looked around before pointing in a direction he assumed to be north. "Let's go this way." "Why that way? You got a better idea?" Wendy raised her hand slightly. "Shouldn't we wait for Ichigo and Miss Dogen?" They were coming as well, weren't they? That's what Ichigo said, muttered Toshiro. He'll be here, no worries about that. But he didn't say to wait though. Natsu scratching his head in thought. Would they even end up in the same place as us? Of course, Toshiro cut off, glancing back up at the sky. Damn, you might be right. Thought so. What are you talking about, salamander? Natsu pointed upwards. The anima. They aren't coming that way. That means their entry point could be anywhere. The chances of it being aligned with our own is. You know, I'm not sure what the odds are, but they won't be good. I don't see anything like an anima either, contributed Wendy. I think it would look similar to that if it was the case. So then, we might as well follow Gajiel's plan. We don't have anything better at this point. Hey Toshiro, what did Ichigo tell you before we left? Toshiro shuffled awkwardly. It was different hearing the words from Ichigo, but he had a feeling that speaking them out loud would sound embarrassing to an extent. He said that he had faith in me to hold everyone together till he got there. Natsu smiled happily. See? Then no worries then. I'm sure he and Miss Doggin will find us whether they get to. That or he'll cause something big to get our attention. He's got a lot more magic to waste than we do. A sudden thought crossed Natsu's mind. Hold on. If he said he had faith in you to hold us all together. Gajiel sighed at the same moment Natsu did. Great. The kid is our official leader according to Ichigo. Wait, what? Toshiro frowned as he saw the looks the two older mages were giving him. They looked ready to listen to him if he asked them to. I'm not interested in being leader. I'm sure Ichigo just meant to make sure we don't do anything stupid. Natsu pointed at himself and Gajiel. What about us? We're likely to do something reckless or idiotic if provoked enough. At least you've got a calmer mind than us, even if you are a bit younger. Natsu gestured towards Wendy as well. She'll help too. Either way, we all decide together what to do for now. It's the safest way. Protector of the fairies. It was hours later when they finally ended up stopping to rest. They had managed to make it out of the forest within the first two, but their direction ended up sending them straight into a desert. From there they had just been walking, hoping to find something. For Gajiel it wasn't too bad, and it was heaven to Natsu with all the heat around them, but it wasn't as good for him or Wendy. Toshiro collapsed against the ground, pulling his whole body into the shade of the palm tree while Natsu and Gajiel grabbed some water from the small pool nearby, Happy and Carla joining them to get a drink as well. All those hours in the desert and the first oasis they found was tiny. Just their luck. At least they had fashioned some of the harder-looking fruit into containers of some kind. They wouldn't die of dehydration with them. There was very few times he could swear that he hated having ice magic, most of them all linked back to the time between his family dying and Ichigo finding him. But he could now add this onto the list. The sun was like pure torture for him. Wendy looked at him with sympathy. Do you? Her voice trailed off, knowing the answer Toshiro would give. She had offered the same thing 10 times already, and he didn't want to trouble her with his annoyances when they were so limited with magic anyway. I'm fine. Just let me rest here. This beautiful shade. Wendy giggled at his expression, pure bliss crossing his face now that he was hidden from the weather. You're much funnier when you aren't being serious all the time. Toshiro moved his head slightly, his eyes glancing up at her from his position. What's wrong with that? Wendy shook her head. Nothing. You're just too stiff? No, that's not the right word. You're like a bad copy of Ichigo. Bad. Toshiro's head dropped back down against the sand, this time in depression. Wendy realized her mistake all too quickly. I'm sorry, she stuttered, unsure exactly what to say to snap the boy out of it. I just meant that you seemed to try and be older than you are by copying him, and I called it bad because it's hard to copy who Ichigo is. It's hard to copy who anyone is in dash. Wendy. Toshiro cut her off before she could go on further. It's okay. I'm not mad. The sand shifted next to him and Toshiro glanced towards it to see Wendy lying down next to him, taking the occasional large breath. She had said the air had an interesting taste here and she had been doing this every so often to help conserve her energy more. Even if he was about her age, he had more experience with endurance. Still, he kind of wished he could do what she was doing. Her eyes seemed to sparkle somewhat whenever she found some air she said was particularly delicious. Why do you try and imitate him? Toshiro didn't answer her for a moment, his mind going back. I guess it's because he saved me. He saved you. Yeah. I would have likely died and no one would have ever been there to notice. He found me by accident, you see. He had no obligations to take me with him. But he did so. Helped me with any problems I had and made sure I knew how to use my magic properly. So he was a bit like an older brother to you. No, that's how he likes to act around you. Toshiro shot her an envious look. I've no idea what it is about you, but you caused him to show a lot more protectiveness and caring than he does for most. Maybe it's because you're a girl. But then he treats Levi different from what I've seen. Maybe he had sisters, Wendy supplied helpfully. Maybe. He's never said anything to me though. I don't know if he spoke to anyone about his family. There are few he might talk to about them anyway. Toshiro shook his head. I was with him for 3 years and he never once said anything. He knows my entire past along with a good chunk of Shinji's, but anything before fairy tale for him is omitted from his stories. I see. I wonder why. Don't ask. I tried once. He's good at dodging questions or deflecting them under normal circumstances. Says he got that from his mentor when I pointed that part out. And that's kind of how he is to me. My mentor, but also bits of an uncle type feel at times too. And so you followed him to fairy tale? Toshiro almost looked shocked at her question. Of course. Where else would I go? Wendy smiled. You really like him, don't you? Toshiro returned the smile. A lot of people do. Did you know that he was the old Magic Council chairman's favorite? He doesn't say it, but he ended up getting so embarrassed when the man turned up to make him a wizard saint. If Ichigo's a bit of an uncle to me, the chairman acts like a full-on uncle for Ichigo. Don't know how much of it was an act, but it certainly looked real enough. I can't see Ichigo getting embarrassed. It's a strange sight, I'll say that. A thought crossed his mind. Speaking of sight, have you seen anything unusual yet? Some sight that might say we are near civilization. Wendy shook her head. I'm hoping to find something soon enough, but right now it's all the same. And I'm not as familiar with magic's interactions, so it is taking some time to understand everything it seems to be trying to tell me. I see. So when you're done learning? Wendy nodded. I should be able to search for something. Take Magnolia back home for example. I can find it in the blink of an eye if we are close enough, simply because all the mages there with their large usage of magic leaves a distinctive trace. I'm hoping a similar principle applies here. Toshiro looked towards her in concern. Wendy dash. It's nothing. Sure doesn't seem like it. Wendy sighed. Sorry. It's strange looking at the magic here. I need to keep focusing when observing it, else I just start imagining the patterns it would do back in Earthland. The heat isn't helping either. Toshiro spotted Gajeel and Natsu approaching before slowly pushing himself back up to his feet and offering a hand to Wendy. Just keep trying. Anything that is hard to do is always worth it in the end. Ichigo beat that into my head a lot during training when I was a bit more impatient. I'll bear that in mind. You two ready, shrimps? Asked Gajeel, holding up 2 of the fruit water containers before handing them to the 2 kids. Good. We want to keep moving. It may be hot right now, but I'll be freezing later on. I'd rather find some shelter before then if we can, especially as I don't fancy sleeping outside. No telling if this place has storms or not, but you don't want to get caught up in one here, trust me. Toshiro and Wendy nodded. We're ready. Let's go. Protector of the fairies. It wasn't until dark that they finally saw something, and they had to wipe their eyes a few times to be sure it wasn't a mirage. They had been tricked once before then, except for Wendy, and she had found their reactions too funny to try and stop them. The town itself was a strange one when it had come into sight. The houses were nothing but stone with circular holes cut into them for windows and doors. They looked a bit worn too, hinting that Gajeel had been right on the storm front being a possibility. Sneaking into the town had been no problem. There weren't any guards, so it didn't seem like they could get in trouble from entering. Still, better to be safe than sorry. After finding an inn of some kind, and managing to persuade the innkeeper for basically anything they could rest in, Natsu and Gajeel left the others while they gathered recon about the place they were in. The man had told them that the town was called Luan, and seemed sad at hearing that they had been crossing the desert without any help from magic vehicles. They had all just assumed it was something similar to the ones they had seen at home and pretended they had gotten lost. It seemed to have worked. Even the cheapest room though was only going to be good for one night. Jewels worked, if barely, as the man had given them a strange look at the currency. Maybe he thought they were foreigners from another country perhaps, or have been conned into fake money. At least he had accepted it though without many questions. Jewels didn't seem to be what people used around here. Before they would leave the next day, however, they needed some food. The thought of stealing it left a rotten taste in Natsu's mouth, but Gajeel responded to all his arguments with a simple sentence. They would only take what they desperately needed. The next objective was a map. If they couldn't find a map, they would have no idea where to go to. They needed to find where Magnolia had been taken to, and they couldn't just ask that without causing any more questions than they had already created. They would just have to hope it was obvious, or at least provide some areas they could search. The final part was to see if the place had any weapons. Miss Doggin had told them about how the people here used magic, and with their limited supplies it would make sense to have some form of backup for them, or rather a go-to tool instead. Finding the stuff had been harder than they had first anticipated. They had tried staying far away from the inn as possible on the slight chance it could be linked back to them. They could hopefully have an alibi if they did things carefully. Breaking into places, however, and not making any noise, was difficult. Gajeel, however, managed to do it the best, some of his motions seeming almost instinctual. Grabbing just a bit of food from a few different places got them what they needed, and not enough taken from each place to raise suspicions. The map was more difficult, since how many places would have a map? In the end they were forced to abandon their search, hoping the innkeeper would have one they could borrow if necessary. That left only thing to get. Weapons. After scouring the whole town, and almost giving up twice, they finally found something that could get them what they were after. It was pure chance, really. A guy had appeared and they had hidden, hoping not to get spotted. The man had just walked past them, a small package hidden under his arm as he looked around suspiciously. That was the thing that had thrown them off. He hadn't looked suspicious as if he knew they were there. It was more of a general wariness. Where the man had come from had been all walled up though. That was where they had almost been about to leave when Gajeel had held a hand out and lighting tapped against the wall, his ear against the wall. "It's hollow," he muttered, looking around for some kind of mechanism that would reveal an entrance. "You see a switch, salamander?" Natsu glanced around, his eyes being drawn to a small fire brazier in the corner of the small alleyway. Its use had to be for light, but why was this one not lit when plenty of others had been? They all should run off the same thing, since it wasn't wood being burnt, that was for sure. His hand reached for the small little orb inside and flicked it, the orb moving clockwise a bit from the movement. Gajeel smiled as he saw what Natsu had found. "Got you." Gajeel grabbed the orb and turned, the wall shifting to the side a small amount. Nodding at Natsu, the two snuck it, finding a similar mechanism on the inside to shut the door in case someone saw it from the outside. They were in pure darkness for a moment when the door shut. A tiny flames burst into existence in Natsu's hands and Gajeel frowned at him. "Just hurry up and find some kind of light," Natsu muttered in annoyance. "Don't want to cause a ruckus if we can't see what we're doing." Gajeel took the lead, his eyes scanning the small room they had entered. It was fairly small, not many shelves lining the walls. Some small desks with boxes on them were placed neatly around the room, display glass revealing the wares inside. A counter was at the end of the room, but no doorways led off from it. It seemed safe to assume that the place was isolated except for that door. No one was there. The man must have been the owner, or perhaps a last-minute customer. A small switch rested to his left and he gave it a flick, bright lights flashing into existence above them and temporarily blinding him. He rubbed his eyes as his sight slowly returned, Natsu copying his actions. The fire was gone now, and luckily such small amounts like that wouldn't have been very hard for Natsu to produce. The moment he was sure he wouldn't crash into something, he began his search. "You're very good at this, you know that." "Yeah." Gajeel glanced at a few of the objects in front of him, picking some of them up to examine them. "When Metallicana left, I was about 12 or 13 I think. Didn't know where to go and I didn't get found like you and Wendy did. I needed to survive myself, but I'm not the friendliest of people. Took a while before I found a guild, and you saw the mess that caused. And back then, I was weak. I needed to find ways to survive." Gajeel placed the objects he was holding down, losing interest as he moved on to other ones. "You learn how to survive when you are truly desperate. When you're afraid that you won't find a single speck of food if you don't risk everything. I ended up in jail a few times before I managed to learn how to not get caught. Those skills don't leave you. I wasn't sure if I would need them ever again, to be honest. Glad I still remember them. You never tried to search for a guild before Jose found you." "Oh, I did. They were crap. And they still refused me. I freaked them out, I bet. I had a bad temper and got them in trouble a few too many times. Jose kind of found me while I was enjoying a small time out in a jail cell. I had gotten caught and was going to have to stay there for about a month. I was out the day after he saw me and he was waiting there for me, an invitation the first words he spoke." Natsu smiled. "So that guy was good once. I wouldn't have fought so hard for him if he hadn't been. Doesn't matter what he did, he still helped me, even if for some selfish reasons. He's a bit mad, that I'll agree on it, but his main downfall was his pride. He was happy once with Phantom Lord's progress. Then Fairy Tail shot up and it all went downhill." Natsu scratched his awkwardly. "Sorry about that." "Don't be. I still was isolated a bit there as well. I wouldn't have ended up with you guys if he hadn't gone mad." Gajeel smiled, glad his back was to Natsu. "This guild is way too noisy and annoying, but it's better than there still." Natsu slung an arm around Gajeel's shoulders, ignoring the man's attempts to throw him off. "See, I knew you'd come to like us all eventually. Wait till Urza hears. Say anything and I'll gut you like a fish." Natsu flinched in fear. On second thoughts, Gajeel chucked a small cylinder at Natsu. "Hold that. Don't open it." The last part was added almost as an afterthought, just in time to stop Natsu from opening the lid. "What the hell is this? Sign says that it's some kind of air cannon. Exact name is air shatter cannon. Keep it for Wendy. Makes sense, we should stick to stuff we won't have to spend too much time having to master. So we just want stuff that is similar to our own magic." Natsu reached for what looked like a sword's hilt, a large guard on it reaching up to where a broadsword blade should be normally. "How about this for me? Sealed flame blade. It'll do. I'll take this." Gajeel gestured towards a large club. "Not sure how strong it is, but this shop does seem to sell magic stuff. Should be of decent quality. Why the hell is this place so secret anyway? How the hell should I know?" Gajeel glanced down at the shop's wares, a stray thought sounding far louder than all the others. "People here can't use magic like we can." "Huh? Learn, Miss Doggin said that already." "No. That's not what I mean. If they can't use magic, why not have a shop like this exposed more? Why the secretary? Is it because these are all weapons here? We've seen a ton of lacrimas being used for lights out there." Before Natsu could respond, they heard a rumbling. Gajeel leaped for the light switch, plunging them into darkness once more. The two held their breaths, their backs against where the walls had to be from their memories. The sound of footsteps filled the air, but they hadn't heard the sound of the doorway closing yet. That meant it was still open. The moment the man started stepping through the doorway, Gajeel hit him straight in the face, dazing him and knowing him back. He was already grabbing Natsu and dragging him along as they sprinted for the door. They could hear the sounds of the man calling out, but they were silenced as he activated the door control, blocking the man from following them straight away. It was only a few blocks away when they stopped their pace, panting a bit as they leaned against the walls. "We didn't forget anything, did we? We forgot Taoshiro's weapon. He doesn't need one. He's still got that Zanpakuto of his." Even without using magic, the kid is sure to already have the skill to use it as a deadly weapon. There's a reason Shinigami have a dangerous reputation, even when dealing with one as young as him. I just hope that guy doesn't come after us. That thinking will get you caught. It's you of the mistakes I made. Gajeel started walking in the direction of the inn, staying to the shadows and gesturing for Natsu to follow his lead once more. We can't afford to stay for long. At first light we're leaving. Hopefully that will be enough time to rest for. Protector of the Fairies. Does anything seem familiar, Carla? The Exceed shook her head as she looked at the map in front of them. They had all gotten bored while Natsu and Gajeel had been out and had managed to borrow a map of the innkeeper. He was helpful enough with giving it, looking like he felt sorry for them for being led around by Natsu and Gajeel. There had been a problem for a few moments with her and Happy when the innkeeper had first seen them, and they had luckily remembered what Miss Doggin had told them. He hadn't gone into specifics, but something had happened with their race, and they had used to have been seen as gods. It was best to just act like normal cats if they could and pretend that they were simply being used by Wendy for playing with and dressing up. It was degrading to act like a real cat, but sacrifices had to be made sometimes. It worked at least. The innkeeper didn't seem to suspect anything and had left them alone about it. They'd have to return the map later if they didn't want to draw suspicion, but for now they could plan out what they were going to do. There were a lot of different places they could see on the map. The world's geography that they were familiar with was completely different here. It was expected, but not by this much. Since they were currently at Lewin, they would want to go somewhere of significance or isolation. The royal city was a good bet, and the innkeeper had pointed it out as a good destination if they were traveling and sightseeing. The problem would be getting there. It was on an entirely different landmass. Going by the map, they might have to head over to Saika and get a boat of some kind towards Treya. From there they would have to travel a bit further before finally reaching the royal city, and that could take a long time if they didn't find any additional transport. The next option was the isolated areas to the west. Nothing seemed to be there, and she had gotten Wendy to ask about that. The innkeeper had gotten tense when they had asked and simply said there was nothing. She was almost 100% sure that the man was lying. He had seemed scared when they had asked after all. So what was there? Could anima be controlled over there? An isolated area would certainly be a good hidden location for the magic. Or maybe it was in the royal city under the king's protection. Two choices, and it wasn't a guarantee that either had what they were searching for. So which one do we choose? She heard Toshiro mutter. The boy bent over the map with a curious stare. Which would Ichigo likely head to? From what I've seen, he'd pick one at random and go there by himself, leaving others to cover the second place. We can't do that, said Wendy worriedly. We shouldn't split up. Carla reached out to the girl and gave her a reassuring pat on the back. We won't. It'll be foolish to split up anyway. He could do it simply because he would have enough magic to substitute for us. Considering your reserves along with the others, we need to stay together to have a good chance. Do you think we can find anyone to help us? Carla stared at Happy, surprised at such an innocent question he had asked. I don't think we can. Why? Carla gestured around them. This is their world. We're strangers to them, even me and you, since we were hatched and raised in Earthland. And we don't know how people would react to us. Maybe they would see us as an enemy as we are not of their world. Maybe they would see us as unnatural and attack us. Humans cannot store magic inside them in this world, but there are 4 people here that now can. They aren't the same as us. Carla looked at Wendy. And we can't forget that the others already exist here too. We can't rely on those we called friends without proof, because they already have a Wendy of their own and a Toshiro of their own. There'll be a Natsu somewhere and a Gajeel elsewhere too. They are the ones with bonds in this world, not us. A knock on the door made them jump. They glanced towards it in suspicion before Toshiro slowly went to the door and opened it a crack. He opened it completely when he saw the pink hair on the other side, letting Natsu rush in before closing the door behind him. Natsu quickly rushed to the window, looking out and signaling towards something below. It became obvious what he was doing when Natsu suddenly came back from the window with 2 objects that he had caught. A hand shot up from the outside of the window and gripped the bottom of it, pulling himself in. Gajeel quickly placed the spoils of their adventure down around them, sorting them into different piles. "You were successful then," said Toshiro, eyeing the food hungrily. "Yeah." Gajeel chucked half a loaf of bread at Toshiro, who quickly took a bite out of it before handing some of it to Wendy and the Exceeds. "Got some decent stuff too." "Salamander, give the squirt her new toy." Natsu nodded, pulling out a cylinder and handing it to Wendy. "It's called the Air Shatter Cannon. Don't open it." "I almost did and would have caused a big mess if I did, so I believe." Wendy nodded, searching herself for anywhere she could place the item. She was forced to simply place it to the side when she realized her dress had no pockets of any kind. She'd have to get a small bag or something similar for carrying it if she wanted to hide it. After dividing a bit more of the food out, Gajeel took the rest and shoved it back into the backpack he had been using to carry the food around it. They were sure Gajeel hadn't had the bag when he left, but they didn't ask where he got it. They had a decent idea already. "So," said Gajeel, taking a seat by the map and staring at it with interest. "What did we miss?" Carla was the one who answered for him. "We're trying to work out where to go to." "I see." Gajeel took a bit of some of his food before gesturing at the empty area to the west of them. "What's there?" "The innkeeper says there is nothing, but he was nervous while saying it." Carla placed a paw against the royal city. "There is also here to go as well." "How about both?" Natsu took a finger and placed it on their current location. He quickly traced it round from the west exit and brought it round in a loop towards Saika. "We'd need to go here to cross anywhere from the look of this map. Why not just cover this area as we go?" "It could work." Carla looked at Wendy and Toshiro. "What do you two think?" Wendy and Toshiro both nodded. "It's fine with us." "It's settled then." Gajeel rolled up the map before shoving it in his backpack, ignoring the look he got from the others. "What?" "We need a map and Natsu and I couldn't find one." "Not much choice right now but to take it." Toshiro sighed. "Fine then. When are we leaving?" "First light." Gajeel stood up and walked to the window, taking a seat there instead. "I'll keep watch for now. I'll wake Natsu up later on and catch some sleep." "I can dash." "You're still a kid," Gajeel said as he cut off Toshiro. "I don't care how much experience you have, you're still a kid. Get some rest. You and Wendy need it more than any of us." Toshiro grumbled a bit but accepted Gajeel's demands, taking one of the beds in the room before falling asleep within moments. Wendy was out in a similar amount of time herself. Carla pressed against her as she slept. Natsu held happy as the blue Exceed fell asleep before glancing at Gajeel, getting a nod in return. "You better wake me up. Just get some sleep, Salamander. We'll all need it." Protector of the Fairies. The same, yet different from before. Wendy yawned loudly, rubbing some of the sleep out of her eyes as she felt someone shaking her. "Natsu." "Come on," Natsu muttered, shaking her a bit more to encourage her to get up. "We need to leave." Wendy nodded slowly, Natsu quickly leaving to wake up the others. She gave another yawn before looking out of the window. The sun was rising but it seemed a bit later than it should have been. She could see Gajeel waking up from Natsu's actions and immediately coming to the same conclusion that she had. "Why the hell didn't you wake me earlier?" Gajeel demanded, stretching his arms out to get rid of any cramps he was feeling from his sleeping position. "We should have left at least an hour ago. You're the one who said sleep was important." "I've kept a good eye out, don't worry. No sign of trouble yet. We aren't even meant to be here when there is any." Natsu crossed his arms. "At least everyone is more rested. We can argue more later." Gajeel scowled but he could see the importance of Natsu's words. He grabbed the club he had stolen and slung it over his back with the backpack to help secure it. Natsu had managed to attach his weapon to his belt but it was loose. Wendy looked towards her before simply deciding to hold it in her hands until she could find something better to do with it. Her movements caused Carla to move around in her arms, the Exceed opening her eyes and before she spoke with a tired voice. "Is it morning already?" "Yep." Wendy scratched Carla's head, knowing that she liked it and that it always helped get rid of any grumpiness she had in the mornings. "I see." Carla settled down in Wendy's arms as the small dragon slayer stood up, a sudden thought crossing Wendy's mind. "Here you go," she said, placing the magic tool she had been given into Carla's arms. Carla looked at it before looking back at Wendy in amusement. "You just don't want to carry it, do you?" "I'm already carrying you," replied Wendy. Carla just shook her head, letting her protests go. Wendy looked towards the others, seeing Natsu carrying a tired Happy while Toshiro was quickly adjusting the strap that held his sword to his back. Gajeel did the same before speaking to them all. "Everyone ready?" They all nodded, leaving the room and heading downstairs. They dropped the key at the counter and began leaving. The innkeeper's door slowly opened and they heard a voice calling out to them, but they kept walking. The man sounded anxious, never a good sign. The moment they were out of sight of the building they sped up, moving as quickly as they could without drawing much attention to themselves. People were slowly filling into the streets in dribs and drabs, and they could hear the signs of a commotion in the distance. They used the few people there to cover their presence, not sure whether the commotion was because of them or not. Only when they finally reached the city's outskirts did they let themselves relax, and even then a watchful eye was kept over their shoulder in case they had been followed. They were back into the desert now though, and they would likely be able to see anything coming from a while away against this landscape. They had little to do though once they finally made it far away from the city. They had the map out at least so they would be able to work out where they were, but the rest of the time was boring. They just had to walk, sometimes with some light conversation while others times with silence. After a few hours however, they saw something that seemed off. Pausing, they all looked at one another before back at the object in the distance. They had to be imagining things. Maybe it was a mirage. Going by everyone's reactions, they were all seeing the same thing. That could mean it was real, but who knew what kind of magical places existed in Edalis? There were plenty of places in Earthland where magic acted in certain ways, so they could all be seeing an illusion of some kind. "How is that possible?" asked Gajeel, staring at the structure in the distance. It was unnatural in a desert. It was like a large plant, sprouting from the ground. Near the top it broke off into two long vines on either side. Near the bottom it had done a very similar thing, however the vines had instead interweaved with one another before separating and rejoining above after creating a heart shape. From the joining point hung something, but at this distance they couldn't see what it was. Underneath those vines looked to be some kind of anomaly in the plant, possibly a doorway of some kind. Again, it was hard to tell at their distance. "That's not normal," muttered Toshiro. "There shouldn't be enough water nearby to be able to sustain such a large plant." "It's real." The others looked towards Wendy. "I can see the magic surrounding it. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but it is there." Toshiro squinted, trying to make out anything else at their distance. "I think I see now why they told us to avoid this area. It's freaky in a way. Think the anima is there?" "It won't be," said Carla before anyone could answer. "Just look at it. It's more likely to encourage you to go towards it than scare you away. If this was it, then it would be further away by now anyway. Anima can only be in this direction if it was far enough away from civilization." Natsu slammed his fists together. "I don't know about you, but I want to check this place out." "Who agrees?" Wendy nodded with Natsu. "I think it's a good idea." "It's risky," argued Gajeel. "Who knows if they are friend or foe? You think everyone in this world is the latter. And that way I won't be disappointed later on if I'm wrong." Gajeel endured the stares of the others for a few more moments before signing. "Very well then. If this backfires, it's on all of your heads. I knew you'd agree eventually." "Shut up, salamander." Getting closer to the place, Toshiro tilted his head slightly, his gaze locked on the building dead ahead of them. It seemed familiar of some sorts. The others seemed to be of a similar mind. Had they already passed this thing before and not noticed somehow? Or was it something similar to what they knew back home? The answer became obvious as they saw what had been hanging from the plant. It was a simple orange flag with their mark on it. The mark of Fairy Tale. So that's why things smelled similar. Gajeel's head shot round towards Natsu. "Why didn't you say anything earlier? I thought I was going mad being the only one who could smell it." Toshiro looked at the two in confusion. "Smell what?" "I can't smell anything either," said Wendy. Should we be able to? Natsu brought a hand to his head. Well, you might be able to, Wendy, but maybe not till you're older. I didn't have a very good nose for these things until a few years back. What about you, Gajeel? Same. See. Natsu looked towards Toshiro. Not sure about you. You're like Laxus in some ways, but less Dragon Slayer than he was. I don't know if Laxus had the enhanced senses, but if he didn't, you likely won't as well. Toshiro glanced behind Natsu at the fairy tale building. So the familiar smell? A wide smile grew on Natsu's face. I can smell the others. Before he could move, however, Gajeel hit him on the head, an annoyed look on his face. Remember what we talked about. These aren't our allies. They're the fairy tale members of the Edala's world. We are the fairy tale members of the Earthland world. They could be entirely different to us. Hell, they could be bad guys here. They're fairy tale mages. How bad could they be? Let's find out. Gajeel froze, turning to Toshiro, who had spoken. The boy was already at the door and knocking on it. Hey, you idiot. Don't just dash. Hello. They all froze as they saw the person who had greeted them. At first they thought the person was very fat. It was then when they realized 75% of the man was clothes, layer on top of layer. They knew that face, however. Gray. Natsu's hands shot to his mouth, stopping him from saying anything else. The Edala's Gray looked at them before looking over his shoulder. He turned back around and did the same motions as before. Then he slowly backed away from the door as it shut silently. The second the door shut, they could hear the sound of chaos. It sounded like something had just blown up, and a tone of shouting could be heard, none of it decipherable to them. The door opened a few moments later with the Edala's Gray greeting them once more. Welcome, he said, stepping to the side. Have you come to join Fairy Tale? They all nodded awkwardly, not sure what to do in this situation Toshiro had forced them into. Edala's Gray's smile widened as he opened the door wide for them. Come in, come in. I'll see about getting the master for you. They reluctantly entered the guild, shooting annoyed glances at Toshiro as they found a table to wait at. It gave them some time to see what the alternative versions of them were like. For starters, the mages they assumed were kinder back home were like monsters here. Lucy had become a terrifying mix of an old Myra and Urza, attacking a Natsu who looked like he was completely harmless. Levi was working in the corner, shouting at anyone who annoyed her while Jet and Droy bullied Elfman. Elfman of all people. Myra was basically the same, and Natsu found his eyes wandering, looking for a white-haired girl he remembered from long ago. She wasn't in this fairy tale, or at least not anymore perhaps. Wendy meanwhile couldn't take her eyes away from her duplicate. She could understand a change in personality. She could understand a difference in allegiance. But this. Why did she look like she was 18? Was that what she would end up looking like when she was older? She kind of hoped so. Did it count as vanity if she thought that she looked hot? We're not here, muttered Toshiro, glancing at Gajeel. I know. Gajeel frowned. Was he not part of Fairy Tale in this world? He wondered what had happened to his copy. Toshiro had similar thought running through his mind. Where was he? They weren't the only ones not there though. Ichigo, Laxus, the Master, Guildarts, even the random people they interacted with weren't there. What had happened to reduce the numbers so much? Their thoughts were interrupted when Laxus did appear, or at least the Edala's version of him. He spotted them before frowning, walking towards them before grabbing a nearby seat to join them. The Edala's Gray followed reluctantly behind him. So, Laxus finally said. You want to join Fairy Tale? I could have sworn that at least one of you is already a member here. We're just as surprised as you are, said Gajeel, lying through his teeth. We ended up coming here from a place far away. Got bored, so we decided to travel together and see some more of the world. We're kind of hoping you could help us out a bit while we're in the area. Just need some info and a bit of money we can earn. I see. Laxus turned towards the Edala's version of Gray. Get me something to drink. And be quick about it. Yes sir, Gray stuttered before rushing off, stumbling as he hurried away to fulfill Laxus's request. The Edala's man sighed, leaning back against the back of his chair. Man, sometimes it's hard running a guild. They just don't treat you the same as they did originally. You're the guild master. Natsu quickly covered his mouth against Gajeel, glaring at him for his outburst. The Aedelas Laxus let out a laugh though. You're not like Natsu over there. He's too much of a wimp, and Lucy picks up on it way too much. I've had to stop her at least 20 times in the past week from going overboard. What's your name? Igneel. Igneel. A predatory smile grew on the guild master's face. I'm the 11th master of Fairy Tale, and I'm sure you're familiar with my name. Isn't that right, Natsu? Despite being shocked at Laxus's words, Natsu hit it well. What are you dash? Are you enjoying Aedelas so far? 4 glares hit him dead on, causing only laughter from Laxus. Now, don't be so overly dramatic. What's the big deal? It's not like I've got a grudge against you or that I'm going to hate you for being from Earthland. How do you know of Earthland? Questioned Toshiro, resisting the urge to draw his sword. Laxus took the opportunity to examine the kid, his eyes glued to the sword strapped to Toshiro's back. I don't know you. Maybe your Aedelas self is completely different. I recognize that blade though. I think I must have met you at some point. Laxus quickly turned his gaze towards Wendy and Gajeel. A little Wendy? Well, isn't that just cute? And you look like that dead reporter I heard about a year back. He was a nosy fellow. Went in too deep with something, and then vanished. Finally, Laxus lowered his gaze, looked at the two Exceed in amusement. And isn't this a treat? Exceeds? I haven't seen many of you since the Great Purge. It must have been, 2 or 3 years ago. Time sure passes quickly when you think about it. Laxus shrugged. Oh well, what were you asking again? Something about Earthland. Yes. How do you know of it? That's easy. We heard about it from the king. The group tensed, Laxus not looking the slightest bit worried. Relax, why don't you? Despite what you may have heard, the king isn't your enemy here. Oh yeah. Gajeel slammed a fist against the table. And why is that? Because you're a fool to think so. Laxus waved a shaking gray over, taking a small glass from the man before sending him away. He brought the glass up to his lips before taking a sip of the red wine from it. He grimaced. I really shouldn't drink this stuff. Disgusting, but it makes me look impressive and sophisticated. Placing the glass back down on the table, Laxus crossed his arms. 3 years ago, a revolution happened. The old king, the one behind all the events with anima to that point, was forced from the throne. And this king, he brought a new world forth for us. We were a dark guild up to that point, you see. Magic was banned, but we resisted. Laxus smiled. You must take it for granted in your world, but we love it more than anything here. The feeling it gives us when we use it, the smiles people get from seeing it. And be told to stop. To be told to give up our greatest joy. We couldn't accept it. Many guilds couldn't. We fought back, but the might of the king was too strong. He and his generals wiped all but us out. We only survived because we ran. And ran. And ran. That's why you're the guild master, muttered Gajeel. Why you're number 11. Yes. Laxus sighed softly. My grandfather, my father, my friends, my mentors, my disciples, they all perished one by one. We went through so many guild masters. I took the reins near the end of that time, and even then it was hard. The sad look Laxus had suddenly vanished as he smiled widely. But then he appeared. If you ask anyone in the world, they'll tell you all about him. How he appeared one day, leading a group of just 6 men and women, and struck out against the world. Like many leaders, he had this charisma around him. Made you want to follow. He saved us all one day when the fairy hunter had caught up with us. Laxus gestured towards Levi. That girl over there was in charge at our teleportation system. It was damaged when we got it, and it only became more and more unstable with every jump we made. Then one day it broke. It works now, but it broke the day we needed it the most. Laxus let out a shiver as he thought back. Urza Nightwalker, the captain of the 2nd Magic War Division. She was merciless. She was responsible for half our dead too. And she wanted to finish the job. Laxus unconsciously clenched a fist before counting in his head slowly to calm himself down. She wasn't here anymore. He killed her. The new king. That was when I first saw him. That smile he gave us all as he stepped towards the enemy, saying not to worry any longer. He said he would lead everyone to a world full of magic. And we all felt the same at that moment. We wanted to believe him, with all our hearts. Laxus brought up his hands, miming a few actions as he continued to speak. He was incredible. With a single blade, he fought against her and her spear, the 10 Commandments. It was the pinnacle magic weapon in existence, and he simply laughed and said that he'd seen a stronger version of it before. I don't know what it would seem like to someone like you lot, but to us, it was incredible. He broke the strongest magic weapon we had ever seen with barely a hint of effort, and took down the rest of her forces after he was done. He reached out to us, and we all saw it spiraling around us. There was a long pause, Wendy finally getting the courage to break the silence. What was? Laxus's voice was soft when he spoke, almost at the level of a whisper that they struggled to hear. Magic. What's so dash? I get it, it's common for you. It was just incredible to us though. Magic spiraled all around him, obeying his every command. It flowed through the air like rivers of water, and he directed it at his enemies with unnatural ease. His companions may not have been as powerful, but they were formidable in their own right. So let me get this straight, said Gajeel. You're saying this person took down the old king, the one who used anima back then, and replaced him as king himself? Yes. Then who used anima this time? This time. Laxus scowled. I see. So that is how you got here. Perhaps I should explain a bit more. Yes, please do. Laxus ignored the harsh voice. Now when the king took the throne, he spread out his power across the entire world. Ever since then, the loss of magic declined dramatically. It's still happening, but delayed at least about 100 years. He does something, stops it from disappearing after use. Even at this distance. He gave us all a life again, and took away the worries many people had. Then dash. I'm getting there. Have some patience, why don't you? Laxus took another sip from his glass, enjoying the alcohol this time to a degree. Our king is too kind, however. Not a bad thing by any standard, but he was too soft in the end with the old king. That man still lives, and he shouldn't have. Laxus placed the glass back down, a dark look crossing his face. There's a war happening. It's been getting bigger and bigger, and it started a year ago. It took a while, but the old king finally made his move. He had been planning something, we all knew it. He started his own revolution, determined to take the throne back. Laxus held out a hand. You got a map? They nodded, bringing out the map in front of them. Laxus tapped at where they were before placing a finger across that point of the island they were on. You see this? That entire lower half used to have cities on the map. They've been removed on a lot of maps right now as they aren't part of the kingdom's maps. They were taken over by the rebels. Rebels? Gajeel frowned. That could be why we were told to avoid this area. And here we assumed anima was nearby. Lucky we were here then. We're keeping an eye on movement, prepared to teleport away if things start getting too hot here. And they will, trust me. The rebels have been expanding towards the royal city, and will soon launch an all-out attack. They've been careful up till now. Few of them can stand up against the king's knights, and rightfully so. I'll tell you, those rebels are deadly, especially the one leading them. He's the worst of them all. Hold on, said Natsu. I thought you said the old king was leading them. I said he started his own revolution, but it isn't like he was the one who lead them all. Think of him as a figurehead of sorts of who they will place on the throne. Their leader, however, is someone different. That man and his accursed family are the bane of the kingdom. One of them would burst through enemy lines, cutting down enemies left and right. One would act like a fool and pretend to be afraid, and then trap you in unexpected ways. And the last? Well, she's just crazy. If they're such a threat, Then why hasn't your king stopped them? You think he hasn't tried? Laxus shook his head. You need to understand how hard it must be for the king to keep a grip on the magic in the world. If he let go, how much magic would end up slipping away suddenly? That's what he is afraid of. And it doesn't help when the rebels made things worse. Worse. The magic you came here with, you called it anima? Well, I heard of it once from the king. It was fairly recently actually. The king told me that someone had been infiltrating the royal city and had been using anima. They were stealing magic for their war. You must have been caught up in a recent blast. Well, they suddenly stole a big chunk, snarled Gajeel. They took an entire city of our world in an instant. Laxus's eyes widened. A whole city. My God. I'm sorry. It got that bad? The king has to know. He had been hoping to trap whoever was involved with the use of it, but he won't want to any longer if this is the price of waiting. Just, to lose so many people at once, I can't believe it. So anima operates from the royal city? Any idea on where the stolen energy gets stored? Honestly? No. It could be anywhere in rebel territory. But maybe. I could ask the king when I report to him. He must be able to work it out. He'd easily be able to follow such a large anima trace. He might already be doing so. Laxus slowly got out of his seat before bowing at them. Do not fear. Everything will turn out okay. I will take you to our king as soon as I can so we can put this whole mess behind us. Natsu smiled. You're much kinder than our Laxus, that's for sure. Thanks a bunch. It's my pleasure. My world has made some foolish mistakes at times, I'll admit that. I hope you can at least enjoy Edalas while you are here. Laxus turned towards Levi. Prep the system for a jump. We're heading back to the royal city. A loud cheer broke out through the guild, Gajeel and the others even getting a smile. It was something for now. A clue to where to go next. It was better than running blind. One question, said Gajeel, leaning towards Laxus. The last town we were in. We found a hidden shop of magical weapons and tools. Why would that still be hidden? Laxus shrugged. It's not illegal, but there are still restrictions on what is being distributed. The king doesn't want a deadly weapon to end up in the hands of just anyone after all, especially this close to the rebels. Why dash? An explosion suddenly sounded, the guild shaking from it as bottles fell off the shelves and tables fell over. Laxus glanced at the door, sighing in annoyance. They found us. The rebels? Asked Toshiro. Laxus nodded. Yep. There'll be a problem if we don't get out of here soon. Levi? Done. Got it. Levi pulled a lever, Laxus quickly dropping to the ground. Every other member of the guild there had already done the same, the Earthland mages looked confused. Everyone brace. They learned why she said that as she pulled the lever, their entire world feeling like it was being turned upside down as the guild vanished, disappearing just as a large blast of fire hit where it had just been. A cloaked man slowly approached where the guild had been, placing a hand against the ground as he closed his eyes. They're gone, he said as he turned back to his comrades. Fairy Tail escaped. What do you expect? Came a woman's voice. The experts are running away after all. You'll get them next time, sis. I got them this time, you idiot. My first shot hit them. Enough, you two, said the first man, walking away from where Fairy Tail had vanished from. Let's leave. We've got to inform the others. Right, Miss Doggin? Protector of the fairies. What are you doing here? The man closed his book, making sure his bookmark was in place before looking up at the man who had spoken. Ah, Sujiro. What a strange coincidence that we would run into one another. Your hair's a mess, by the way. Sujiro's hand shot to his head, desperately trying to get his long black hair under control. It's not my fault, he argued back, pulling the strands of hair back into a bun behind the back of his head. The process revealed a large scar across the right side of his face by his eye before it was covered once more by a set of bangs. I just got up. It's far too early for stuff like this. Don't tell me you're not tried, Shuakura. Shuakura shrugged. It matters not if we are tired or not. When our king calls, we answer. Sujiro kept trying to fix his appearance, correcting the large katana on his back. He couldn't help but get annoyed at how well dressed Shuakura was, despite the time. He had already gotten his black hair into its wavy style and had managed to not have a single crease in his shirt, the suspenders over his shoulders like normal. He could even see the scar that man had over his left eye, Shuakura not bothering to hide it like he did with his. When he finally saw himself once more as presentable, he straightened up, standing by the door once more. Shuakura gave him that annoying smirk he had and he tried to ignore the annoyance he was feeling. This man always got on his nerves, despite them being friends. That was perhaps a too strong word. Comrades at least, that they would both agree on. What were we summoned for anyway? I merely read stories, I don't know what will happen until the next page is turned. Seriously? Another book reference. If it bothers you so much, just say so. And you'll stop. Not at all. The smile Shuakura was giving showed his amusement at the situation. I'll just enjoy it more. I can't stand you sometimes. Sujiro reached for the large door they were by and opened it, heading into the room. It was a massive area inside, pillars scattered along the room to hold up the large ceiling. Apart from that, the room was mostly bare except for the large red rug that led from the doorway to a throne, raised up higher above them. Did anyone else get summoned? Not at all. I could hear the idiot snoring from down the corridor when I passed on my way here. I doubt he knows. I checked on the girls on the way here but they seemed unaware of anything. Those two were locked in the lab working on uncovering the data they received recently while she was half asleep, hugging one of her stuffed animals again. I thought that chick would have been summoned. Any early rising normally hints at some kind of problem, and she's normally the first choice to call on to sort them out. Perhaps Shuakura cut himself off as he and Sujiro felt a presence behind them. They immediately dropped to one knee, their heads bowed. My lord. Faint glimmers of blue light shone past them, intensifying as the footsteps increased. They heard their king pass but refused to look up yet, waiting till the king had taken a seat in his throne before addressing to them. You can rise, you know. I never bother too much with formalities when it comes to my friends. You are too kind, my king, said Sujiro, raising his head. But we are your soldiers. Your knights. To not show you this respect would be shameful. Very well. I'll try and persuade you another time then. A smile appeared on the king's face. Today is a very good day if I'm correct. I spoke with Ririka and Nozomi early, and my own power has confirmed the same thing. Something, or someone, came through the anima. Something with physical form. Shuakura smirked. I see. And the situation with the rebels. They will undoubtedly try to seize control of whatever or whoever came through. It's likely to be a whoever matter as I doubt something without sentience could get through anima and not get broken down into magic. And you want us to get to them first. If you can. Whether we acquire these people or not, it won't matter in the slightest. They are here, that is all that matters. They could, however, pose a future threat. If they are unwilling to join us, we cannot allow the rebels to acquire these unknowns. They may end up needing to be eliminated if necessary. Sujiro got to his feet, bowing. It will be as you say. Before he could leave, however, Shuakura grabbed him by the back of his tattered black cloak, stopping him from escaping. Forgetting something? Huh? Sujiro looked confused. What? Shuakura turned back to the king. Do you know where they are heading or where we can find them, my lord? They were near Fairy Tale last I checked. I've kept my eye on them since they appeared. They've vanished now, which means Fairy Tale moved. It was only an hour ago when Fairy Tale reappeared on the outskirts of the city. They are likely in there. Did you lose track of them? Some would. It's hard to keep an eye on someone you've never met by senses alone. They got mixed up in that guild hall when Fairy Tale teleported. I can't tell where they are in it anymore, and I would just as likely end up tracking the wrong people if I tried to guess who they are. Shuakura frowned. How will we know who they are then? Oh, I'm sure Sujiro here will be good at stopping them. Before I lost them, I could have sworn he were with them. Think on that as you will. The two nodded before leaving, heading in time with one another to the door. The king let out a sigh as they left, glancing out the window at the sun still rising. I wonder if he's awake yet. The king got to his feet before heading for the door himself. Might as well check. I'm sure he'll enjoy the surprise. So many interesting things are happening now. I can't wait to see them. What about you lot? There was no response, but the king laughed anyway. I thought so. Protector of the fairies. A new world to see all alone. Ichigo's eyes snapped open, his hand flying to his back before relaxing as it brushed against his Zanpakuto. He was alive, and the presence of Zanjutsu meant he wasn't imagining it somehow. He must have gotten through the portal at the last moment. He looked up. He hadn't expected to recognize anything, so that didn't matter, but still, where the hell was he? He hoped the others would have better luck that he was having. The others. He spun round, looking for Mistoggen. He couldn't see the fairy tale mage. Where the hell had that guy gotten to? He had thrown him through first, so he had to have made it. Unless it was an effect of exiting at different times. Perhaps, by almost not escaping at all, his exit position had changed somewhat. It would certainly explain why Mistoggen was nowhere to be seen. He couldn't even sense the man, but he couldn't sense very far in the first place. It looked like he'd be stuck on his own for a while then. He pushed himself up, taking note of the small crater he was in. He had a feeling that it hadn't been there before he had appeared. How high had he been when he had been flung out? It must have been high, and he actually felt proud he wasn't feeling any pain from it even after being unconscious for a brief moment. So then, what was nearby? He looked around, seeing nothing but mountains in one direction. In a lot of directions was nothing but rock actually, but one place had some kind of hope of a help. It was a bit lower down from his current position, but he could see it just below and in the distance. Large walls circling a large city and leading into other areas of the city, each layer getting higher than the next. In the very center was a large tower, stretching up to the sky and even to the floating islands with it. Floating islands? That was new. The city looked promising though. He wondered where he was anyway. He looked at the sun. It looked about mid-morning roughly, but he could be off by a few hours if time worked differently. Still, with duplicates of people, he would have to be careful. There was a chance he'd end up running into copies of his friends if he was unlucky, and it would make it hard to find them if he kept chasing after the Edela's versions. And, while he was tempted to see what the Edela's version of him was like, he'd have to try and stick to finding the others first. Prioritises. It took another 2 hours at the very least till he finally made it to the city's furthest edge. He could have made it there much faster with Shunpo, but he had to be conservative. That meant relying on his power as little as possible if it wasn't necessary. It had taken a while to find the way down from where he had been, but doing so meant more time to think anyway of plans. The gate didn't seem to be heavily guarded at the moment, the guards looking tired and letting travelers in without bothering to check them out much. He pulled his coat further around him as he went to the gate, pulling it closer around him. His hair color was too uncommon. That was the conclusion his mind had come to long ago. Apart from Gildarts, he hadn't met anyone with hair like his. It would likely be the same in Edela's too, and he didn't want them spotting such a recognizable color in case he had done something bad here, or if he did anything bad. It was a good thing Requip barely needed any magic for little uses, and a good thing he kept his coat in there. He'd improvised it somewhat since he last wore it, sending it to a proper tailor's after his own methods of repairing it had failed. While it had been there, he'd ended up requesting for a hood for while it rained. He hadn't seen the point of getting a separate coat for that weather, and it was cheaper to just add it on the coat itself. It was paying off now. With his hood up, and by staying close to some of the small crowds entering the city, he got past without any trouble. If anything, they had barely bashed an eyelash at him. It seemed he wasn't the only one who tried to hide their identity at times, but he doubted they did anything if the people didn't cause any trouble. He had to admit, the city was impressive. He could see towers he had missed before in each district of the city, a lot of them alongside the main tower. He'd say he was in a lower residential area, and even that was quite fancy. Still, this would be the best place to find information. There had to be a pub or something. It had been how he and Laxus picked up rumors back when they had been a team. That brought up an interesting though. What would the Laxus of this world be like? And Levy too? And what about everyone else? He was sure it'd be funny to compare, but the same might be said for him too. He took another step before freezing for a mere moment. His instincts told him to spin round, but he ignored them as best as he could, moving on like nothing was wrong. His eyes subtly scanned the crowds, even going so far as to rest against one of the houses in the pretense of taking a break and enjoying the sights. There was someone watching him. He wasn't sure how, but there was. But where? Kisuk had always said the best way to find someone is to look. Or at least to not appear to be looking. Act natural. Never let on that you know something is up. People let their guard down when they believe they had the upper hand, and it made it so much easier to spot the mistakes they made. No one. He could have sworn he had sensed something. It had been like a probe of sorts, reaching out and brushing against his own magic. He had never felt anything like it. The person might not be close by then, and had instead found him through some kind of sensing, if they had even found him at all. He was overreacting too much here. It had only been like a brush against his magic after all. It would have stayed on him if it was truly trying to watch him. Putting the odd feeling to the back of his mind, he entered a nearby pub, taking a seat in a darker corner of the bar. He checked his pockets for any loose jewels and scowled when he found none. The barman was generous enough to give him some water, so at least he'd have something to drink. And he listened. Another skill Kisuk had emphasized on when it came to gathering intelligence. Patience. He had to simply wait and listen. Half the stuff he heard was random gossip, stuff that person A did and how person B reacted. There was a few interesting facts on the city he was in, but nothing really relevant outside of what the place was like. He was ready to leave when the door slammed open and an oddly dressed man entered, shouting out to the occupants of the bar. "A hero is here." "Don," the barman said happily, smiling at the newcomer. The rest of the bar seemed to be suddenly excited as the man entered, and that let Ichigo get a closer look at him. The man seemed to have a small mustache while his hair had been tied into braids around the back of his head. His outfit was strange too, similar to a jumpsuit of some kind with an elaborate belt around his waist. Around the neck of the jumpsuit, it seemed to extend into wool that stretched around the back of the man's neck to the other side. The jumpsuit itself was left open from the midway up his chest towards his neck, revealing part of his chest on display to everyone. The two main things that made the man stranger, however, was the cape and the hat. The hat had a D with a cross overlapping it, the hat stretching upwards to be as tall as the man's face or taller. The cape floated behind the man in the wind, attached under the wool around the man's neck. The man struck his arms across his chest before he let out a loud laugh. "Bo ha 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 ha. Bo ha 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 ha." Ichigo almost dropped his glass in shock as everyone joined in with the same laugh. What was up with this? The man, despite appearing like a weirdo, seemed to be greeted like he was a celebrity of sorts. He leaned forward a bit, raising his glass to his lips and taking a sip to try and look inconspicuous. "Busy day, Don?" asked one of the people. Don simply laughed before answering. "Every day is a busy day for a hero. I can't just settle for doing nothing when there could be danger at any moment." "You think there'll be trouble?" Don turned to the other speaker. "There is always trouble out there. It is why heroes like me exist. It doesn't matter if they aren't here yet. I will prepare for them regardless." "You're so cool," muttered one of the younger people in the bar. Now that Ichigo looked closely, he saw a lot of kids had entered the bar. They hadn't been there before this Don person entered, and the barman didn't seem to be bothered by it either. All the people in the bar seemed to have one thing in common from the look of it. They idolized this Don person. And Don seemed familiar with all of them to some degree. He was even responding to a few of them by name. In that distraction at observing everyone else, he barely noticed someone approaching till they sat down opposite him. Ichigo glanced at the person in surprise, not expecting anyone to join him. And especially not this celebrity. "You're new here," said Don, smiling at him. Ichigo was really glad he still had his hood up and that it was dark, else his hair would have been perfectly visible to the man in front of him. "It's always good to meet newcomers to the royal city. What makes you think I'm new?" Don frowned before he continued on like nothing was wrong. "My mistake then. You seemed confused to some degree who I was. Most people in the royal city know my name, and I always enjoy hearing the stories from other cities in the kingdom. I can't run around as much as I did in my youthful days after all. Ichigo glared at the man before setting his glass down. Yeah, I'm new. Haven't been around this place before, so I'm just getting my bearings and taking a break here. How interesting. Don gave Ichigo a beaming smile. My name is Don Kanonji, one of the king's loyal knights. Ichigo gave the man a strange look as if he wasn't convinced. Yeah. I don't see it. Don laughed, using his signature laugh that he used before. You're an amusing fellow. But then most people always had that reaction when I started saying I was a hero. Took bringing our new king to the throne before most people started believing in me. I kind of get that feeling. Ah. A kindred spirit. Before Ichigo could stop the man, he found himself caught in a one-handed embrace as the man slung an arm over his shoulders. Thomas. A set of drinks round here. Get one from my new friend. Coming up, hero. Don smiled at the man before noticing Ichigo had escaped from his grip. Ah, don't leave, friend. He exclaimed as Ichigo made to leave. Just stay for one drink, why don't you? Yeah, said one of the people nearby. It's not often Don here finds new people to talk to. Humor him for us. Everyone started laughing at the man's comment, even Don himself. Ichigo sighed before lowering himself back into his seat, taking the glass that ended up getting passed to him. One drink. Agreed then. Ichigo took a sip before he found Don still staring at him. You never introduced yourself. Did I not? Indeed. Don kept staring as Ichigo stayed silent. Very well. It is not my place to pry. How are you enjoying the city so far? It's impressive, muttered Ichigo. It'd take a while to look around everything. It would. I'd personally recommend getting close to the central tower to see it in more detail. It's a wonderful sight. Say, Ichigo said. Have you seen anyone dressed in a lot of cloaks? Normally has about 5 staves with him. 5 staves? That's an unusual number. No, I'm afraid I haven't. What about a pink-haired guy with a loud temper? He'd be with a small blue-haired girl and a thuggish-looking guy. Don again showed a blank face. I'm sorry, I've never heard of anyone like them. Well, it was worth a shot. What about a white-haired kid? He's my little brother. We got lost after being separated from our friends, and my dad would go mental if he heard about this later on. He'd have a large katana on his back, a 4-pointed star as the guard. No, Don frowned. Wait, no, I don't think I have. But I've seen a similar sword. Strange. Is your brother a fan of Sujiro? A huge one, lied Ichigo. He loves that blade of his. Ah. Sujiro would be happy to hear about that. He's a very serious person to most people, so kids aren't always the biggest fan of his. I better be off then. Ichigo stood up, leaving his glass as he headed for the door. Thanks for the drink. Until next time then. If you need help, just ask for old Don here. I help all in need. I'll keep that in mind, said Ichigo, leaving the bar before quickly disappearing down a side street. He saw Don exited the bar a few moments later, looking around for someone. He had a feeling it was him. Why the hell would that guy be looking for him though? Going by the man's personality, he doubted he had brushed his magic early. Something felt off. But maybe he was overthinking things. Don gave up in moments, heading back into the bar to not re-emerge even after waiting for a few minutes. It had to be his instincts acting up since he was technically in enemy territory so long as he stood in Edalis. At least, if the man was an enemy, he wouldn't have anything much. It had been risky asking about his friends, but the man seemed like the guy to know a lot that happened in the city, and was also the sort that would be a terrible liar. And there was no way the others could have gotten in trouble or would have been suspected yet. Leaving the bar behind, he headed further and further into the city. The city seemed to get nicer and nicer as he went up the levels. There was even a military division, though that was right before the central tower. It was also as far as he could get without breaking in. That sensation was back again. It was more like a probe now, brushing against his magic with curiosity, as if trying to identify him. It had gotten stronger the closer he had gotten to the central tower. Something powerful had to be in there. Perhaps something that could find where the people Anima had taken had been directed to. No choice. He slowly snuck round, looking to get as close as he could to the central tower as he could, even if a wall was in the way. When he got there, he quickly looked around, making sure no one was watching. When he was sure the coast was clear, he used his magic to amply his jump, enough for his hand to grip the top of the wall. He quickly pulled himself up a bit, peeking over the wall at the district below. It looked similar to the others, just with barracks mixed within areas and a few more towers. He pulled himself over the last bit of the wall before dropping down as safely as he could, quickly taking cover in the shadows. He doubted they'd think he was supposed to be there even if he had gotten past the guards. Slipping past the guards was a tough job, and it took a lot of time too. He felt like they almost spotted him at least 20 times by the time he had managed to get to the central tower, but his luck had held. He slipped through a door and began his climb up the stairs, hoping to at least discover something of interest that could help him. Patrols weren't very heavy in the tower. Perhaps they assumed no one would get through the main camp. Since mages here needed magic tools, it would certainly limit some of the magic they could use, which likely meant infiltration through magical means was something rare or non-existent. It made things easier for him at least. "I'm bored." Ichigo froze, leaping into the shadows and hiding behind one of the pillars this massive tower seemed to have. He was just in time as two girls turned round the corner. One of them, the one who seemed to have just talked, had long pink hair, tied up in pigtails, with a white hat on her head with two extensions on it falling behind her, looking similar to rabbit ears. Her expression matched her words, her hands swinging with her steps in some kind of attempt to find something interesting to do. "Bear with it, Ryrika." That was the second girl. She had spoken a lot less casual than the first girl, a cream-colored cardigan with a tiny lion figurine attached to her waist. Instead of having long hair like his companion, hers was cut short and was dark green instead. "I'm not Nozomi. This stuff is boring to me. You were interested yesterday." "That was yesterday." Nozomi sighed. "Your attention span once again matches your reputation. Do I have to make it cute for you to focus? Or would that make you likely to steal it for yourself?" "I wouldn't do that," muttered Ryrika with a pout. "Or at least I don't think I would." "Of course you would." Ichigo tried to spot the newcomer, seeing them coming from the opposite direction. And it looked like both were stopping to talk to one another. Just his luck. The newcomer was a purple-haired girl, her hair tied behind her with a red ribbon. She had a second red ribbon wrapped round her waist, matching the one in her hair. It also seemed to serve the purpose of holding a sword in it. "Senna," Nozomi said in greeting. "You were visiting the king, weren't you?" "Of course she was," said Ryrika, a predatory smile on her face. "I wonder what scandalous things the king's right hand was up to in there. What would people say I have to ask?" Senna went bright red, stuttering as she spoke. "What? I wasn't doing anything of the sorts. I just went and checked up on him." "Yeah, checked up. He has been acting strangely," said Nozomi. "I saw him this morning and he barely seemed to be noticing me or anyone else. He kept muttered something but I couldn't make out what he was saying." "I noticed the same." Senna glared at Ryrika before the girl could get another taunt off. "I asked him about it just now. He said he's found something interesting. In fact, I've been sent to retrieve him." "Retrieve him?" "Yeah. He's sneaking around the tower right now." Ichigo froze, his breath catching in his throat. What had she said? Ryrika though seemed to treat it amusingly. "Well, he's an idiot. What guy tries to break into the king's home? Surely he would know better than that, especially with us here. It is a foolish choice on their part." Nozomi tilted her head curiously. "Do you need assistance?" "No need," said Senna, holding up her hands in an X. "I can do this all by myself. Besides, I've already got help. They'll around here dash." Senna's mouth closed, her head turning and glancing around the room before her eyes locked on the pillar Ichigo was hiding behind. "He's right there, it seems." Ichigo burst from his hiding spot before they could even take a step towards him, sprinting for the window. A sword appeared in Nozomi's hands in a flash of light and she swung the blade at him only for him to dodge it, throwing himself out one of the windows. He felt one of them grab his leg in an attempt to stop him. He wasn't sure if it was to capture him still or to stop what could look like a suicide attempt to them. He didn't have time to ponder on the answer though. With his other leg, he slammed the foot of it against their hand, forcing them to release him in pain. Or at least that had been the plan if they hadn't held on and had instead being dragged out with him. He saw it was the purple-haired girl, the one who had spotted him. And she looked terrified. That solved the question on whether they thought he was committing suicide or not. He could see it in her eyes as they fell. She thought she was going to die. He could tell he'd regret this later, but he couldn't let someone die for something like this. He grabbed her, focusing magic at his feet to slow his descent as he created platforms in the air. He didn't want to waste any magic on creating a solid platform, so he'd have to settle for simply using it to slow his descent. His feet touched the ground and he dropped the girl on the ground, quickly rushing off. A hand suddenly grabbed him from behind. That girl was persistent, and she was good to have recovered from that shock so quickly. She had drawn her sword and was already trying to attack him as she pulled him back. His own blade was drawn in kind, coming down against her own as he barely dodged her first strike. He could see she wasn't brilliant at using that blade. It was more like it was something new to her. Sure, she had talent, but none of the experience if she wanted to beat him. Within moments she was disarmed. He quickly turned to leave only to come face to face with a pink pin-shaped head. He almost jumped back in shock. The thing had no eyes, mouth, ears, or nose. Apart from the pink head, the rest of its body was covered by a white cloak of sorts, the arms and hands of the creature sticking out and revealing the same color on them as the head. The creature looked at him before the pink changed to red and the creature lunged at him. Ichigo was prepared, however, slashing through the creature with one swing. It was weaker than it seemed. Whether then was how it was or there was a trick to it, he didn't wait to find out. He charged away, briefly looking over his shoulder. He saw the girl behind him staring at him in annoyance, barking orders of some kind. He was confused at what until he saw more of those creatures appear beside her. Time to leave. The moment he turned a corner and got out of sight for a moment, he used Shunpo. This was the time for magic. Just one quick step and he increased the distance a lot between them. He leaped over the military district's wall and re-entered the residential areas, hoping to find somewhere to lay low. If they were like that Dawn character, then they'd find out where he had been early. He'd likely have to leave the city if he wanted to avoid capture. Those creatures. What the hell had they been? He hadn't even sensed the one behind him. It was like it wasn't even there. It didn't seem to give off anything. It was just blank. And it seemed this Senna had more of these things. His eyes wandered upwards and he scowled. They could fly too. They seemed like they were only melee creatures, but that flying was annoying. A few were already in the next district. Had she summoned it remotely there somehow? That meant the gates would be watched. Unless he wanted to get out in a flashy way, he'd have to do it carefully. There had to be another way out. It wasn't until it started getting dark that he felt like had gotten his answer. Those creatures had been getting closer and closer. A few had entered the district he was in, but he had managed to stay hidden. He had been forced to use Shunpo a few minutes previously though, when one had found him and he had been forced to kill it. The Shunpo had been for afterwards when a group of them had suddenly flew towards him. Killing one of them alerted the others, it seemed. That made them even more dangerous than before. Now though, he had his answer. He had managed to overhear a few people talking as he passed, mentioning about the blockade between districts being set up. One of the men had claimed he was going to sneak over to the lower districts later anyway using the sewers. Said he had important stuff to do and was willing to risk trouble to do it that day. He had seemed a bit drunk at the time but still sober enough to not be making stuff up. Just boosting on what he could do and would later not bother trying. If there were sewers, they'd have to leave the city somewhere. It wasn't the nicest way out, but it'd do. He only had to find an entrance. An access point had to be somewhere. He was interrupted from his thoughts from the sound of someone in pain. It sounded close. He looked to his left and stopped the source, a man getting beaten up by a larger group. He could see a woman with him, trying to break free from the grip of another of the attackers to help the man. "You get away from him, you bastards." The man sneered at her before punching her in the stomach, a groan escaping the woman's mouth. "Sorry, but the fellow over there's caused us a bit of trouble. He needs to learn a lesson." "What lesson?" muttered the man on the ground in defiance. "So I have my own opinion. What's wrong with that? We don't need a foolish person like you in this kingdom, especially with your views. You must have noticed no one shares them. You're just trash to them." The man on the ground tried to stand, but the ground beat him back down. Ichigo could see the damage they were doing to the man. He was bruised all over and blood was seeping from cuts and bruises he had gained from them. It looked like something could even be broken. He should leave. He had to leave and couldn't afford to be slowed down. But he couldn't just stand there and watch this. He was already punching the group's supposed leader before he even knew it, sending him flying against a wall. "Boss." The group released their victims and tried to strike him, but they were sloppy. He doubted they were fighters in the slightest. Their superior numbers must have been why they were dominating so much. And he could smell the alcohol on their breath. As quickly as it started, it was over, the group fleeing from him. That would cause a commotion. He had to get out of there now. "Wait." Ichigo stopped, turning towards the woman. She was kneeled down before the man who had been beaten up, desperately trying to patch up some of his wounds. "You have to help him." Ichigo looked at the man sadly. "I can't. I'm leaving this city right now. I'm in a hurry." "You're the one they're all searching for?" "Yes." "Why?" "Broke into the king's palace." The woman laughed. "You've got guts." She looked down at the man. "But please. You have to help him. He's my brother." Ichigo looked behind him, already seeing the commotion in the distance increasing. Those creatures would likely be there soon. "I can get you out of here." Ichigo's head snapped back round. "You know a way out?" "Through the sewers." "So you know about that?" "Yeah, there's an entrance not far from here. I'll lead the way. But only if you help my brother." Ichigo bent down by them before grabbing the brother and placing him over his shoulder. "I'll have to heal him once we get out. I only know rudimentary first aid." "That enough?" "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. Get me out of here first and I'll see what I can do." Protector of the Fairies. "I'm sorry, master," said Senna, bowing before her king. "My blanks have been unable to find the intruder, and I have been unable to catch up to him once he escaped my sight." And she wonders why people misinterpret stuff when she calls him master. Ririka. "What, just saying." "Don't worry," said the king, leaning back against his throne with his hands clasped in front of him. "I sprung this on you quite suddenly anyway, and I certainly didn't expect anyone to be idiotic enough to get into the tower anyway. Besides, I'm sure he'll turn up again at some point. It was still unacceptable of me. I will accept any punishment you deem necessary. I already said it. Don't worry about it. If he was capable of escaping you, it means either of two things. He's either very lucky, or very powerful. If it's the later, then it simply means he was stronger than you, or at least at this moment in time. I'm sure you'll catch him next time. Thank you for your leniency." "No problem. Now, Nozomi." "Yes, my king." "The results of the disturbance show a similar matching to that one all those years ago. The odd one you felt when people entered Edalas without entering through an anima." "I see. I thought as much." The king laughed. "Well then, I suppose this should be fun at least. Senna, I'll give you free rein here. The moment he appears, you can go greet him for me. Try and bring him back to me if you can. Update me as often as you can." Senna nodded. "Yes, master." "Good. As for you two, keep an eye for other disturbances. Don't want any uninvited guests running around the kingdom causing trouble, do we?" The two girls nodded at once. "Yes, my king. Also, send Don here if you see him." The king smiled sinisterly. "I heard he snuck out to the bar again when he had paperwork to do." He needs to be reminded of his duties. Further away in the city, Don shivered, his head turning towards the tower he knew his king was in. He raised his glass before taking a swing. Yep, I think I'm busted. Protector of the fairies. Too good to be true. I hate transport. We get it already, Salamander, said Gajeel, feeling a bit sick himself. He didn't remember stuff like this messing with him as much as it was at the moment. Wendy even seemed a bit dizzy, and Toshiro barely seemed affected. He prayed that this wasn't a Dragon Slayer thing he'd end up getting in the future, but, looking at how no one else in the building was affected, he guessed this would get worse later on when he got back. At least the kids didn't have it so bad. You lot all right? Asked Laxus, leaning down by their fallen bodies. Perfectly. Good. Laxus walked open to the doors before opening them wide. We're here. The group slowly got to their feet, following after the guild master. They could see in the distance what had to be the royal city. Towers shot up inside it while walls enclosed the city and divided up areas into districts. They could see a large central tower reaching up to the floating islands around it, something that Laxus took note of as he followed their gaze. Impressive, isn't it? I guess you could say that would be called the King's Tower. It's where he lives, eats, rules, and more. He doesn't leave the tower as much as people would like him to, and he's barely left it in the last few months. They say he's got something special in there. A secret project that consumes his every waking moment. And what do you think? Laxus shrugged. I don't care either way. What the king does with his time is his concern. It isn't my place to pry. Laxus turned back round, calling out to the Edela's version of Natsu. Hey, get over here, why don't you, Natsu? We need a lift. But. I mean, yes, of course, I'll just need to load the fuel. And do you want seats for everyone, or is speed more important, or dash? Stop panicking so much. Just get the truck. Speed isn't much of an issue here. Yes, sir. Laxus watched the Edela's Natsu leave before turning back to the Dragon Slayers. Good kid, but he panics so much when he isn't behind the wheel of some kind of vehicle. When that happens, he's more like you, Natsu, or at least from what I can see about you. I can't believe I'm such a wimp here, muttered Natsu, depressed. He turned towards the others pleadingly. Don't you dare tell anyone. How much is this worth to you? Gajeel. Wendy shook her head at the older mage. That's wrong. She's right, said Toshiro. We should just state a price ourselves. No point in letting him choose. Toshiro. Their argument was interrupted by the sound of an engine, a large truck smashing out of the back of the ground. The group's jaws dropped, seeing the so-called truck being nothing more than a massive lorry. You forgot the ramp, Natsu. The hell with that. Hurry up and get it. Laxus laughing, glancing at the shocked group of mages. Told you. Totally different personality. Let's get in the back. He quickly led them round to the back of the lorry and opened the doors of the trailer at the end. They could see it had been modified somewhat to have windows and seats built into it, some of the windows nothing more than holes in the metal. The seats looked out of place, with some being armchairs, some being sofas, and some even being bar stools. Sorry about the mess, muttered Laxus, choosing a particularly looking comfort chair for himself. We built this thing back when the previous king ruled. We had to make do with what we could use, and this was meant to be an emergency transportation vehicle. We'd use it to get people back to the guild quickly, or to even have as a last resort for escaping. It's more than enough, said Gajeel, dropping down onto a sofa and bringing his legs onto the other side of it. Let's just go. Laxus waited till they were all seated before shouting forward. Hey Natsu, let's go already. They heard some kind of shout back, but the walls blocked a lot of it out. The truck suddenly leaped forward, heading towards the royal city. Wendy glanced out the window she had sat by, her eyes sparkling with wonder as they got closer and closer. After a while of simply watching her in confusion, Toshiro finally gave in to his curiosity. What's up with you? Toshiro asked, on noticing how lost in thought she was from what she was seeing, Carla having to pinch her from her seat on Wendy's lap. Wendy winced, looking down at Carla, who simply pointed at Toshiro. She blushed from embarrassment before muttering quietly. Um. What was the question? What had you so excited? You didn't even hear me. Wendy glanced forward, seeing Laxus deep in conversation with Gajeel about Earthland's fairy tale while Natsu was lying on his chair in pain. Still, she lowered her voice as she answered. It's the city. It's simply incredible. Taoshiro lowered his voice to match hers. What do you see? Well. It's so beautiful. Beautiful. Wendy nodded, gesturing towards the tower. The magic around that place is like the heart of it all, the rest of the magic in the city spiraling around it. It's not as intense outside the city, but once you get past the walls, it's crazy. Really? Really? It's almost like... Wendy stopped mid-sentence, looking back out the window. Taoshiro looked confused at her sudden pause. Almost like what? No, Wendy muttered. I'm imagining it. Too big of a scale anyway. Don't worry about me, I'm just seeing patterns I'm mistaking for other ones. Taoshiro looked unconvinced. If you say so. The lorry suddenly stopped, the group almost falling from their seats. Laxus stretched as he stood out of his, walking to the door and pushing it open. Looks like we're as far as Natsu will take us. We should be by the gate. The group followed after Laxus, seeing a large gate a few meters from them. Laxus waved at Natsu and the boy nodded in response, driving off without a word. The others looked at the retreating vehicle in confusion before Laxus noticed their confusion. He'll be back. He can't stick around here too long, else he'll cause problems. He'll meet us tomorrow when I head back, so we'll find somewhere to stay for the night here. What's the deal with the gate? Laxus followed Natsu's gaze to the main gate, seeing armed guards inspecting each person who passed. There must have been some trouble recently. Perhaps a rebel scout made it past the outlying defenses and tried to infiltrate the city. He waved the group forward, his hand going into his pocket in an attempt to find something. Just follow me. I've got permission to head straight through and I should be able to get you guys in too. Finding what he was after, Laxus pulled a piece of paper from his pocket before walking up to one of the guards. They couldn't hear him, but he seemed to be arguing a bit, waving his hands back at them a few times and pointing at the paper in his hands. Eventually the guard seemed to relent before allowing them all pass, but not before looking at them in suspicion. Their pass got them through the next few districts of the city, bringing them to what looked like the last residential area of the city. The area beyond seemed more militaristic in appearance, and the guards in place were much greater than earlier checkpoints. Laxus came back to them in annoyance this time, looking at them apologetically. Sorry, you won't be able to get past this one. What about Anima? Taoshiro crossed his arms in annoyance. You promised us help. Don't worry, I'll get it for you lot. Laxus shoved a hand into a pocket before pulling out a few strangely marked coins. Here, take this. There's a bar nearby, just round the corner. Greenstone's Retreat it's called. I'll meet you lot there after I'm done, and hopefully with news. The group reluctantly waved goodbye to Laxus before following his directions, ending up using the money to get something to drink while they waited. Natsu sighed, leaning down against the table. This is boring. What did you expect? Asked Carla. Like we would be allowed to see the king so easily. I had hoped we could, muttered Taoshiro. All this waiting is killing me. Natsu nodded. Let's go explore. Taoshiro looked at the others. Do you mind? Gajeel nodded. Go ahead. We're here till tomorrow according to Laxus anyway. No point in all of us being cooped up in one place. Gajeel watched the two leave, happy following after them. He saw Wendy trying to leave too before grabbing her by the back of her dress and pulling her back. Not you. What? Wendy pouted. Why? They asked first. I still need someone to keep me company. You and your cat will do. Fine. Protector of the fairies. Laxus shuffled awkwardly outside the doors to the throne room. He had been let in easily enough, but he knew he was still being watched. People were still cautious of people from fairy tale since they had been a dark guild once. Straighten up, muttered Shuakura. You're terribly dressed, the best you can do is at least walk and stand properly. And then he had to have been saddled with having this man as his escort. He could stand most of the nights, but there was something about this guy he didn't like. Even though they had been friends for... How long had they been friends actually? The memories were there but they felt strange. There was stuff when he had been a kid and Shuakura had helped him fight off some bullies. And then there had been that time when he had been elected to take over as the next guild master and Shuakura had cheered him on. Strange. Why had he been so reluctant to be escorted by Shuakura again? It must have been his imagination. But still. Stop messing around with the poor man's memories, Shuakura. You know how I feel about that. Laxus froze, hearing both the words and the meaning behind them. Wait, my memories dash. The same memories he had seen before flashed before his eyes before shattering, revealing the originals behind them. He spun towards Shuakura, leaping at him in rage. Shuakura chuckled in amusement before swiftly dodging the wild blow and grabbing Laxus's arm, using his grip to throw the man down to the ground. Laxus made to stand but he was stopped as the blade of a sword hung over his throat, Shuakura still looking at him in amusement. Let him up, Shuakura. Shuakura complied, his sword vanishing and changing back into a bookmark. He slotted it back into the book he was carrying today before stepping back from Laxus. The king slowly approached before reaching out to Laxus. I apologize for my night's actions. You must have had a hard day, Laxus. Laxus refused the hand by quickly bringing himself up to rest on his knees, his head bowed. You have no need to apologize, my lord. I was too rash in my actions. Do not trouble yourself for my foolishness. The king withdrew his hand before speaking. Very well then. With a clap of his hands, the doors to the throne room opened and the king led the way in, taking a seat at his throne to look down towards the others. You have news for me? Laxus nodded. Yes. The rebels have solidified their grip on the southern lands. They've pushed a lot closer to Saika. You're quite close on that. The king looked to his right, seeing the land in the distance through an open window. However, your report is a bit too late. My lord. Saika fell. Saika fell? But it was perfectly safe. There wasn't any forces nearby. We checked the borders constantly. The king sighed. And there lies your mistake. They took advantage of your routines, slipping through once they realized you wouldn't check much further beyond. A scouting force would be all they would need. After that, well, they simply needed to send the rest across once you left. The city's defenses were already weakened. I'm sorry, my lord. I didn't realize dash. And look what happened, said Shuakura, interrupting Laxus. Because of you, the rebels now have the biggest foothold they ever had. With Saika, they can now freely launch an attack on Treya. If they fall too, they may even be able to launch an all-out assault here. It is hardly the fault of Fairy Tale Shuakura. The king looked down at Laxus. Prepare your guild. We will need reconnaissance of their movements. When they move, I'll know, but I'd appreciate the warning for my men. It will be done as you say. The king raised an eyebrow as he noticed Laxus still remaining in the room. Was there something else? Yes. Laxus shuffled awkwardly. They'll hear. Laxus slowly looked up at the king only to see a large smile on his face. I see. Laxus could feel the excitement the king was feeling from his words. Even trying to be calm and passive about it wasn't working. Isn't that interesting? What should be done about them? Isn't it obvious? Capture them, eliminate them, do whatever is necessary. Shuakura. Send word out to Sujirua. I'll let him have some fun here. My lord. They currently believe the anima to be a result of the rebels. I managed to throw them off the scent. Wouldn't it be far more prudent to use them as weapons against the rebels? You don't know much about them, do you? The king sighed. I know exactly what kind of people won't be absorbed by the anima. Nozomi and Ririka were thorough in their experiments, and they came to the same conclusion in the end. Dragon Slayers. Dragon Slayers. You won't be familiar with the legends of dragons. That's for good reason. They never existed here. They only exist in Earthland, or at least in that form. I'm sure we have human versions of them somewhere in this world. Dragons were powerful magical creatures, and dragon slayers were those taught the magic to kill them. There is something in the magic that makes them special. It stopped them being taken by anima. I'm curious myself, said Shuakura. What makes them so special? The king tapped his nose. Some things are secret here. It matters little anyway, but I don't believe it is simply because they are dragon slayers but rather because of what that magic has a part of. The important thing to be wary of is that they have extremely powerful magic. And they don't need the use of magic tools like you Laxus here. That is Shuakura was cut off by a wave from the king looking back to the window and staring down at the city below. My king. Well, would you look at that, the king muttered. Get going. If we're lucky, we may even catch another little pest. The king looked back towards Laxus. Leave this to us now. Head straight back out and get us the info we need. The sake of Treya depends on it. The two bowed once more to the king before quickly retreating, the king smiling once more as he stood out of his throne. And so it completes itself. Things are moving quicker than I ever thought. We going to have so much fun, brother. Protector of the fairies. How the hell did you drag me into this? You still followed. Taoshiro sighed as he let Natsu lift him up to edge of the wall before resting on top of it. He held out his own arm and helped pull Natsu up, happy offering help with his wings. He could have just flown the two of them across, but that would have been more obvious. He still didn't understand why they were breaking into the military district, so he just blamed Natsu for getting bored at everything else. Once they were in, they'd hopefully have no problems, and hopefully there would be something interesting in there, else they were risking jail for nothing. They both dropped down to the ground, slipping amongst the grounds. There were odd patrols around, but a fair amount of people seemed off duty for now and were just relaxing around in the district. He didn't like acting like a child, but it would come in handy here if needed, as he could claim he and Natsu were looking for their dad. They'd hopefully believe if so long as Natsu acted the part and pretended he was looking after his little brother. From the corner of his eye, he could see something big happening near the tower. Guards were assembling for some reason and rushing past them, in a hurry to get somewhere. He wondered what the problem was. Maybe the rebels had gotten too close to the city and they were going to repel the intruders. Did that mean the fairy tale outside could be in danger? Or was his mind looking for enemies where none existed? He was so lost in thought that he didn't realize someone was in front of him till he crashed into them. He fell backwards from the impact, ending up in his back before snapping out of his thoughts just as a hand appeared in front of him. Hey, you okay, kid? Taoshiro nodded, being helped up by the strange man in front of him. Sorry about that, the man said. I didn't mean to crash into you. I was in a hurry and didn't see you. I'm okay, muttered Taoshiro, looking around to see where Natsu had vanished to. He spotted the dragon slayer just looking at a few of the houses, so he guessed he'd have a moment to talk. It was my fault too. The man shrugged, following Taoshiro's previous gaze. I didn't want to draw you away from your friend. Are you two looking for someone? Our dad. He said to meet him here. Sorry for the trouble then. Tell your father Sujiro Kyuzaka sends his apologizes. I will do. The man patted him on the back before heading off, rushing after the other guards. He quickly took the time to rush after Natsu, seeing the dragon slayer watching something. Him. What is it? Natsu shook his head. Sorry, it's just that I sensed a strange sense of familiarity from that man. And did you see that sword on his back? Taoshiro's hand shot to his sword before he could stop himself, resting on the hilt of the blade. I saw it. Didn't it dash? It was. Taoshiro looked back at where the man had left to. I think that was the Edila's version of me. Hey, is that Laxus? Taoshiro turned, seeing Laxus heading out from the tower. I think so. Cool. He must know something. Let's go find him. What do you say, Happy? There was silence, Natsu turning when he realized Happy was far too quiet. Happy. He froze when he saw the figure behind them, Happy in the figure's arms and a small knife placed against the Exceed's throat. Natsu made to step towards the figure only for the knife to get closer to Happy. You bastard. Let Happy go. I will, said the figure, the voice revealing the figure to be a man. But only if you come with me. A sudden explosion happened in the distance, all eyes being drawn to the blaze. It took just a few moments before they registered whereabout it was. Near the others. Natsu looked at Toshiro, but the man holding Happy cut him off before he could speak. None of you leave. There are friends over there. Exactly. You don't want to end up in what is happening over there. Toshiro frowned. What are you dash? There's no time, interrupted the man. Listen to me. You've been tricked. The fairy tale you are familiar with it, not an ally for you here. You're rebels, aren't you? Natsu snarled at the man. Why the hell should we trust you? Every time he entered the guild, he would put all of you to sleep. None of you saw his face till the day you fought alongside against Laxus. Toshiro frowned. What is that meant to mean? I know, muttered Natsu, his tone quiet. We're going with him. Wait, what? You heard me. Natsu looked at the man. Release Happy. You don't need him to grab out attention anymore. The man agreed, releasing Happy so that the Exceed could leap into Natsu's arms in fear. Satisfied, the man turned and quickly gestured for them to follow. We need to leave quickly. Before the net completely closes. Wait, said Toshiro. Our friends dash. Don't worry. I didn't come here alone. Protector of the fairies. Gajeel ducked under the blade of one of the soldiers, swinging his club round at the man. It connected with the soldier and sent him crashing against the wall. He had little time to celebrate that little success before more soldiers charged at him. He didn't understand what was going on. They had just been waiting when one of the soldiers had walked in originally, coming up to them and asking for them to surrender. They would have had better luck trying to get them to follow and then trap them later on. Asking them to surrender had put him on guard instantly, and it was a good thing he had done so. The moment he had refused to comply had been when all hell had broken loose. The soldier had tried to grab them before he had slammed his fist against the man and thrown him away from them. That had been an unsaid signal for all the men outside to charge in the moment they heard a ruckus happening. It wasn't that the soldiers here were very strong, but rather they were like a swarm. And he couldn't say he could fight as well as he wanted with just a club. One thing that had come out of this at least had been the revelation that his club could reflect some blasts of magic. Nothing huge, but it helped. And then some overzealous soldier had the clever idea to start throwing bombs around. He had taken out a third of his own allies in the process of taking out the supports of the building, and he had barely gotten out of there with Wendy and Carla before the building had collapsed. It was nothing but rubble now, rubble that had become their battlefield. As the latest group of soldiers tried to take advantage of his distraction, a blast of wind sent them flying backwards. Thanks, Squirt. Gajeel quickly took advantage of the opening Wendy had given him, swiping at the group with his club. Wendy had gotten a grip on her weapon quickly enough, even if it was one of the first times she had used it. He guessed it was her sight at work, as she wasted far less than the first attempt, as if she understood what she had done wrong and had adjusted her actions correctly. The soldiers were scared, he could see it in their eyes. He doubted they believed they would be much of a threat. Why the hell were they after them anyway? Had Natsu messed up somehow? He hoped not. Come on then. He gave the soldiers a predatory grin, shaking up their resolve even more. There's only 3 of us here, one who's a little kid and the other being a cat. Can you really not beat us? The soldiers were close to running off. No one would want to fight a pointless battle if the outcome was already decided. He just had to shake them up a bit more and they would run. A clapping sound filled the air. He looked around, searching for the source. A man slowly came into view, walking down the street with an amused smile on his face, his black hair pulled back into a bun. The man stopped just short of the lead soldiers, patting a few on the back. Don't worry, you lot. I wouldn't have sent all of you ahead if I realized they were this dangerous, but I'm here now. There is no need to interfere. I'll take them both on myself. Gajeel sneered. Arrogant, aren't you? The man simply shrugged in response. Maybe. But I'm confident in my abilities. Tell me, are you? In one swift move, the man drew the sword from his back, aiming the blade towards them. My name is Sujiro Kyuzaka, Knight of the King and the wielder of the magic weapon, Hyorin Meru. Gajeel glanced back from Sujiro towards Wendy. Hey, isn't Taoshiro's blade called that? Wendy nodded. I think so. I see. A smirk crossed Gajeel's face as he cracked his knuckles. You know what, I may like this. Bringing the club up, he pointed it at Sujiro in response to the blade. Gajeel Red Fox, Mage of Fairy Tale and the Dragon Slayer of Metallicana. The two stared each other down before then charged, each swinging. Sujiro was faster with his swing but Gajeel's club stopped the blade quickly. Gajeel pushed his advantage, knocking Sujiro backwards as he continued his swing. Sujiro dodged the follow swipe before stabbing forward, Gajeel dodging the blade by a hair's width. He prepared to bring the club down on Sujiro's head only for the man to suddenly swipe upwards, the blade of his sword stopping the club in its tracks. Sorry, but you made a foolish choice in fighting me with such an inferior magic tool. With those words Sujiro's sword cut through the club, tearing it in half like butter. Gajeel retreated backwards, avoiding the swings the man launched at him. A loose piece of rubble hit his foot and he lost his balance for a second. That second was one he couldn't have afforded to lose, Sujiro taking advantage of the moment and swinging at the Dragon Slayer. Before he could complete his strike however, he jumped backwards, a vicious blast of air smashing straight through where he had been standing. Another inferior weapon. Sujiro glared at Wendy, seeing the object in her hands. If I recognize the model correctly, that one is somewhere around the Mark III to the Mark V. All following models were thinner than that one and had better control, though I have to admit you use that one well. And you are? Wendy Marvel, Mage of Fairy Tale and the Dragon Slayer of Grandini. Oh. But this can't be all you Dragon Slayers are capable of. You're just using the stuff of our world. Let's see that destructive power of yours. Let's see the power of those who can store magic inside their bodies. You dash. We were set up, weren't we? Of course. I bet he was a good actor, but it is sometimes hard to know how much someone acts when you have that stupid Shuakura messing with everyone's minds. I don't know whether you were turned in by the real Axis or whether he was a sleeper agent or something. Sujiro swung his sword round a few times before bringing it to rest on his shoulders. Who cares anyway? He isn't your ally and that is all that matters. He's ours. Gajeel scowled, turning towards Wendy. Any idea where the others are? No. Sorry. Damn. Gajeel sighed. That would be an issue. They had to lose this guy. Maybe this would be the best time to use magic, but he was still reluctant to commit too much energy here and now. It was lucky that he never needed to decide in the end. A flash of light shone brightly above them, and they all glanced upwards at once, each of them getting varying amounts of shock as a large fireball flew down at them. Gajeel quickly rushed towards Wendy and grabbed her and Carla as he reached them. He had barely made it a few steps further before the fire consumed the area he had previously been in, Sujiro still standing there. Well, that went up quickly. Didn't expect it to burn as well as it did. Gajeel looked towards the newcomer, seeing a woman standing near them with a smile on her face. What do you think? Powerful enough. That was you. Gajeel pointed a finger at her. Are you an idiot? You could have hit someone. Yeah, that was kind of the point. The woman looked back towards the flames. Sujiro, give our regards to your king. Tell him we'll be coming to visit soon enough. The flames suddenly dispersed, the area where it had been frozen solid before it cracked and broke into millions of tiny pieces. Sujiro took a step forward, completely unharmed as the shield of ice disappeared from around his body. Well, if it isn't one of the ringleaders of this little rebellion. You come to join your precious leader. The woman's eyes were bursting with rage but she held it back, quickly hiding the anger and replacing it with a laugh. I'm sure he'll be out soon. Didn't you say that last time we met? I'm not wrong. Soon doesn't specify a time phase. Sujiro shrugged. Oh well. You know what happens next. Of course. The woman smacked a foot down on the floor and they heard something crack, smoke bursting upwards and concealing them from view. Sujiro rushed forward, slashing through the smoke only to find them all gone. He screamed in anger, slashing down at the ground which froze on impact. Find them. He turned towards the soldiers, still waiting where he had greeted them. What are you all waiting for? Find them. Do it. While the soldiers searched, the woman quickly led the group down alleyways, rushing towards their destination. Gajeel kept trying to ask questions, but she refused to answer till they were safe. They finally stopped just as they ran into some familiar faces. Natsu and the others. Salamander? How did dash? No time. A masked man stepped forward, all of them recognizing him for who he was. We're getting out of here. A flash of light appeared from 5 points around them, each staff lighting up as the man went through the hand signs. With the last one complete, the world spun once more, everyone within the group escaping through the portal just as soldiers stumbled upon the scene. Sujiro snarled once more in rage before turning back around and heading for the tower. He would have to inform the king that he failed. As the group reappeared as the spell ended, Gajeel glared up at the man, trying to ignore the motion sickness he was feeling. You have some explaining to do, Mistogen. Protector of the Fairies. The Shiba clan. The group waited around the large circular table, maps scattered along every inch of it. Mistogen slowly led a man in to take one of the seats with them, gesturing for all of them to take a seat. It was now that they could get a better look at the people they had been saved by. They knew Mistogen, the man removing the mask around his face so they could see him more clearly. He had no reason to hide his identity from them after all. The first person by his side was a muscular man with messy black hair that extended down his back, the remains of what looked like a bandana wrapped around his left arm. A strange-looking sword was strapped across his back by his waist, looking similar to a meat cleaver. A small bag rested above it, holding who knew what. He also seemed to wear strange gloves that extended up his arms, lacrima embedded into the material. The second person was the woman, part of her black hair sticking out of bandages that wrapped round her head. She wore a strange mix of a white shirt and a red robe, exposing her arms where a tattoo could be seen on the left one. Bandages wrapped round her ankles and her right shoulder, and it was past her right shoulder that really caught their attention. It ended straight there with some metal cover over it, a sword attached to the side of the stub. From what they had seen, the two looked like siblings of sorts. They certainly acted like it, and the man had a habit of referring to the woman as sis. They had introduced themselves as Ganju and Kyokaka respectively, both claiming to be Shibas. The newcomer with Mistogen was yet to introduce himself, but he looked old. He was tall with long white hair, stretching down his back and his front as a beard. In his right hand was an elegant staff, 2 lacrima places in the top piece with multiple rings hanging from the top. His entire way of dressing seemed to scream nobility, even if the things he was wearing weren't very fancy in comparison, and his every move said the same. They had a rough idea who this man was. The previous king. Well then, shall we get started? Mistogen gestured at each mage and Exceed in turn, introducing them. Natsu Dragneel, Wendy Marvel, Gajeel Red Fox, Toshiro Hitsugaya, Happy, and Carla. They all waved in response, Ganju and Kyokaka cracking a smile. We've already said who we are, said Ganju. Ah, that saves some time. And they know who I am. Mistogen gestured towards the last man. Very well. This man is Dash. Faust Shiba. The group glanced from him to the other Shibas. Natsu was the one who finally asked the question they were all wondering. How exactly are you related to them? I don't see it. It's not any of our official surnames, explained Mistogen. For instance, I am Mistogen Shiba by this regard. We may be referred to as the rebellion by the kingdom, but we have another name for ourselves. The Shiba clan. We were some of the originals, stated Kyokaku. Me, Ganju, and our older brother Kyan. We formed it about a year and a half ago, though Kyan didn't really want us getting involved to start with. Said it would be too dangerous. He came around. Ganju smirked. We just pestered him a lot till he cracked. It took 6 months before we finally started getting off the ground though. Not many people wanted to join our cause to start with. For one, you've got the king, a man preaching magic for all. And then you have us, the ones who would rid this world of magic. Rid this world? Toshiro looked at the others. But Laxus Dash. The man lied to us, said Gajeel. There was this man that basically admitted it to us. Sujuru or something. Said it could even have been the work of some guy. What was he called again? Miss Doggin grabbed one of the pieces of paper on the table and passed it to them, revealing a smartly dressed man on the cover of it. Shuakura Tsukishima, one of the most terrifying men I have ever met. He has the ability to manipulate memories, placing himself in them if necessary. Any person who comes into contact with him is put into isolation while we question them. The risk of sleeper agents is too great otherwise. How did they get a lacrima to do that? Miss Doggin glanced at Natsu. They didn't. The group couldn't hide their surprise, Miss Doggin continuing on with his explanation after seeing their confused looks. Magic was foreign to this world. To be honest, half of what I've learned about these knights is very new knowledge. It's why I never told you before. Then what happened? Miss Doggin shrugged. I don't know. Perhaps the start of what created Exceed? They can't exactly store magic, and they need lacrima to function properly, but they can manipulate the energy in some ways. Not mages like you lot are, but not magic tool users like everyone else is here. Each one has a unique way of using their gift, and the king is the most advanced of them all. Give this a few hundred years and this could have become commonplace. Or maybe it was and they were wiped out. I don't know. It's why they could stand up to me, said Faust. I had an army, and they were only 7. It's the scale of power they could achieve in comparison to my men. How do you fight someone who can wield magic like you lot? Most of my men ended up fleeing. And that's how they took the throne. Carla looked at Faust. Why were you spared though? Laxus said that the king had been too nice. Faust bowed his head in shame. He was. I had never felt so ashamed in his presence. Any other man would have killed me. Even his allies wanted me dead. But he spared me. He said I was no threat. Faust laughed. Well, look at me now. Still, I don't think he minds me being a threat this way. This time I don't want to steal magic from your world. Gajeel looked towards Miss Doggin. If you're with this lot, I'm guessing Anima is still under the control of the king. Miss Doggin nodded. Yes. We've tried to infiltrate the city multiple times but to no success. If we could get there, we could have tried to find out where you all had been sent. How have you guys survived this past month? Past month. The look on Miss Doggin's face slowly changed to shock as Gajeel spoke. What are you talking about? How long have you all been here? 2 days. Natsu looked at the others. We didn't miss anything, did we? Like some kind of magic sleep spell. Not that I sensed, said Wendy. My magic would have responded otherwise. I see, muttered Miss Doggin. So that's what happened. What happened? Miss Doggin looked towards Toshiro. You and Ichigo came another way, didn't you? Where is he, by the way? Miss Doggin flinched, looking away. A strange sense of dread filled Toshiro at that sight, not even realizing that his magic was slowly leaking outwards and freezing his chair solid. Where's Ichigo? We went through something called a Senkaimon. It's a dangerous path as we had to travel through a place called the Danga, the world between dimensions. Of course Kisuk also said it connected time, but only now can I see what he meant. We were chased by something called the Kautosu. I guess that forced us back in time somewhat, ending up getting me here a month early. You didn't answer my question. Miss Doggin looked at the ground. We couldn't let it touch us. That's why we had to run from it. And we almost made it. But I tripped. Miss Doggin could feel Toshiro's icy glare on him. Ichigo grabbed me and dragged me forward. There wasn't enough time to set me down, but I was slowing us down. I told him to leave me behind. Ichigo wouldn't do that. No, he wouldn't. I was thrown forward by him, and I ended up entering Edelas. I saw him running, almost there. And then the gateway shut as the Kautosu touched him. No. I'm sorry. If I got sent back a month, who knows what could have happened even if he escaped its clutches, something that is impossible anyway. If being chased sent me back a month, he could have ended up God knows when. He could have been sent back 100 years even, and by this point he'd be dead. No. I'm sorry. Miss Doggin reached out towards Toshiro only for the boy to slap it away. Shut up. Toshiro reached for his sword, the ice around him spreading out further. Why the hell are you alive? What good are you? Toshiro. Wendy reached out to him only for him to slap her hand away, still glaring at Miss Doggin in hatred. I don't need your help here. Where's my mentor? Where the hell is Ichigo? Because you're lying. He can't be dead. There's no way he can be. Toshiro, I'm sorry. We both know the truth here that, if he was alive, we would be able to sense his magic. Miss Doggin looked around. I can't feel it. If he's survived, I don't know what happened to him. Hopefully he was happy. Hopefully he didn't spend too much time searching for us. Toshiro slowly let go of his sword before leaping out of his seat, heading for the door. Wendy went to try and go after him only for Natsu to stop her, shaking his head. Let him go. But dash. Salamander's right. He needs some time alone right now, else he'd probably try and kill Miss Doggin here in rage and sadness. I'll try and talk to him more later, said Miss Doggin. As much as I hate to ignore this, our first priority is to save everyone in Magnolia. We're on a very limited time scale here. Fine then. Gajeel crossed his arms. What's the problem? Faust slowly stood from his seat, bringing their attention to him. If I may. Miss Doggin nodded at him. Go ahead. Thank you. Faust looked towards the mages. As you know, I was using anima before I was removed from the throne. I'm sure the king has been studying anima as well, but has been more restrained in its use. From what we have gathered, he is trying to seal this dimension off from Earthland. Is that possible? Asked Natsu. It is very possible. An old associate of mine once learned of the possibility back when I was king. It was irrelevant to getting more magic for us however and we ignored it, but this king wants to use it. And we aren't exactly sure why. The problem occurs with getting everyone back. Miss Doggin sighed. If we don't access where anima is controlled within the month, it will be too late. The king will use the magic of our friends to seal off Earthland from Edelas, consuming them in the process. And you will all be stuck here. So what do we do? Miss Doggin looked at Faust, the two nodding at one another. After discussing it, we have come to the conclusion that the best result would be to activate the anima, this time in reverse though. We would suck all the magic from this world into Earthland, restoring our friends back to normal and taking away any chance for Edelas to ever open an anima ever again. The process would also drag all of you back home, and Ichigo too if he is still alive by this point. Wendy looked at Miss Doggin in shock. But not you. Not me, but I have my own way back. You don't want to stay here? In your world? Miss Doggin smiled softly. I could, but I don't want to leave Fairy Tail. It's not like I wasn't prepared for this eventually. I do have family here, so I will miss that though. Miss Doggin slowly looked at Faust, the older man patting Miss Doggin on the back. The others looked between the two before their eyes widened in shock. He's your father. Miss Doggin nodded. I can say that a lot more proudly now than I could before. He's not the same as when I was against him. We're getting too much off topic. Kyokaku pulled one of the maps from under the piles before pointing at locations on it. With Saika under our control, we're getting close to our goal. With time against us, the only solution is to push forward quickly. We need to take Treya before we can launch an all-out assault against the royal city. Natsu looked confused. Can't you just teleport forces in like you did to get us out of there? It's not that simple, stated Ganju. You're assuming that something like that is easy to perform. It's time-consuming to set up, and easy for them to trap us if we get too close. And, not only is it a costly magic to perform, it can't take more than 30 people at once. Our group has a lot more than that. It's why we need Treya. Kyokaku traced her finger between Saika and Treya. The sea here is fairly calm, very little trouble between these two continents. The only problem is that the only true landing spot is at Treya. There are others, I'll admit that, but nothing we can reach in time. Treya is our best bet. It'll be hard. Miss Doggin looked at the group of mages. That's why we will all need your help. You are the only ones who will be able to help fight against the knights if they show up, and I don't mean with magic tools. Those people need to be taken down by your actual magic. You think they'll be there at Treya? Faust looked at Gajeel. Yes. Before they could play it off somewhat, but Treya is too important. I'll expect at least one knight being present, maybe more. And they are deadly. Do not underestimate them. Our leader, Kyan, fought one of them once. Where is this Kyan anyway? Natsu noticed the pained looks Ganju and Kyukaku gained. Ah, I'm sorry. He's not dead, muttered Kyukaku. The king took him prisoner. He saw Kyan as a big enough threat that he actually went out in person to capture him. He lured Kyan into a trap and fought him. We got there just as it ended, and by then it was too late. Kyan had been captured. He's likely rotting in a jail cell somewhere. We'll get him out when we take the royal city, said Mistoggen. That's a promise. What I want to know is how this guy got people to fight for you lot. Gajeel frowned as he remembered what Mistoggen had previously said. You said the king preached magic for all and Kyan fought for no magic. Why would people join a cause like that? Fear. Ganju shuddered. Magic is wonderful, but many people are starting to fear it. 7 against an army, and the 7 won without losing a single person. Those still in the kingdom respect them, but that's not to say most of those 7 aren't feared. And there are plenty of people who see the destruction and pain magic can cause. We're all fighting to break that cycle. We all believe it's time to give it up. It's time to stop relying on magic, especially when it will eventually run out. We don't need it to survive. We don't need to rely on it. That doesn't mean we won't use it at the moment though, said Mistoggen. Without it we wouldn't be able to stand against the forces of the king. It simply shows how powerless people are against magic if they lack a way to fight against it. We will even the odds for all and make sure no person can reign supreme because of it. The group of mages looked around at one another before they all came to the same conclusion. We're in. Protector of the fairies. Do you mind if I join you? Taoshiro looked up to see the face of Faust above him. Mistoggen's already tried. Get lost. I heard. You really don't like my son at the moment. Son. Taoshiro shook his head. Who cares, just leave me alone. I'm afraid I can't do that. Faust lowered himself down next to the boy, joining him in staring into the distance. The boy couldn't have chosen a more depressing place to look from. There was nothing but wreckage in front of them. If he was correct, then it was from the recent attack on the town they had made their base after taking it from the king's forces. He hadn't sat in this place before, but he had sat in similar places. I know what you're feeling. Taoshiro remained silent, something Faust took as a sign to continue speaking. I've lost people myself. The majority of my commanders are dead except for one, and he survived because he managed to escape. Hughes, Coco, Sugarboy, Biro, they all tried to fight back when the king broke into the city. They all died in the end. Maybe Urza could have helped, but she died far too early in the war, if I can even call it that. I've had people die before, muttered Taoshiro. My entire family died, and I was left alone. What the hell do I do now? You joined a guild, did you not? Fairy tale? Mistoggen said something along those lines. Taoshiro laughed dryly. My bonds there are weak in comparison. I'm new. I've got no reason to stay there. Weak bonds are still that. Bonds. So long as you have them you can't really be alone. And what about the bonds that have been broken? Taoshiro sighed. And it's not just me here. Ichigo's friends will be devastated. He's got a friend who made himself a villain all for his sake. And there's another that has stood by him since they met. And Shinji, well, he lost it when Ichigo was poisoned. People can adapt. I'm an example of that. I was in despair. I lost all sense of who I was, and no one was there to help me. I had no one left, but people find a way. Shinji won't. He'll leave. He followed Ichigo to Fairy Tail with me because he's the only one he would listen to. And if Ichigo's dead, he won't stay. He'll have no reason to. What about you? He sounds like he's similar to you. Toshiro looked down at the ground. I'm not enough. We're friends, but it's not the same. Do you really believe that? Faust saw the truth in Toshiro's eyes, a hand reaching out to pat the boy on the back. You don't, I can see it. Who cares anymore? I do. Faust got to his feet, pointing out to the world with his staff. There's a whole world out there, just waiting to be seen. That's how I can keep moving forward. Even if I lose my friends, I can't stand still. They would never want me to. It is the same for you. Tell me, would this Ichigo want you to sit here and mope around? Would he want you to despair because he wasn't there to help you anymore? Toshiro paused before slowly looking up at the man, shaking his head. No, he wouldn't. Then tell me, what would he want you to do? He'd said to do whatever I want. He'd say it shouldn't matter what he thought and that I should do whatever I want to do. See? Now why did you join Fairy Tail? It was because Ichigo was there. Really? Faust shook his head. Then why didn't you simply stay nearby? No one said you had to join the guild. He slowly took a hand and poked at Toshiro. You chose to join it, did you not? No one said you had to join it because Ichigo was in it. You still made that choice yourself. No one made that choice for you. But he joined it dash. So what? You still made the choice yourself. And tell me, why would you ever leave the guild you made the choice to join because your mentor died? So what if he was in the guild? His death should not affect your future. Move on, walk forward, and hold your head up high. Retreat and you will age, hesitate, and you will die. Toshiro looked towards Faust and shook, but the man was already retreating away from him, heading back inside. It had to be a coincidence somehow. Those were some of the words Ichigo said Zanjutsu told him. How could Faust know them? Could Zanpakuto have their own physical copies here like they did? What the hell is up with this world, he muttered before getting up and heading back. Faust had been right. Enough moping. It was time for action. Protector of the Fairies. Why are we here? Carla huffed as the question was ignored, almost being tempted to just leave Mistoggen and not bother where he was taking her, and happy to. Why did they have to go alone? Why weren't Natsu or Wendy coming with them? Mistoggen reached a small house in the city before knocking on the door. Carla couldn't hide her surprise when a one-winged cat opened the door, a smile appearing on her face as she saw Mistoggen. Mistoggen, this is a surprise. I wasn't expecting company today. Shagata. Mistoggen bowed his head in greeting. I thought you would want to meet some of our newcomers. Shagata looked back into the house quickly. Can it wait? I've just managed to get all the kids to sleep and I don't want to leave them alone. There's no worry about that. I've brought them here. Here? But where Shagata found her voice vanishing as she saw Carla and Happy by Mistoggen's side, her eyes looking at Carla in particular. But that's how. May we come inside? Please. Shagata pulled back, opening the door wider for them to enter though. Carla stared up at Shagata as she passed, surprised at the strange look she was getting. The feelings she was having from that too were strange as well. Why did this person feel so familiar? Shagata slowly led them through the house. Carla managed to peek into one of the rooms, just seeing the signs of many young Exceed asleep in beds. Shagata led them into a wide-open room before gesturing for them to take a seat. She quickly left the room before returning a few moments later with drinks for them, Mistoggen politely declining his as he sat back furthest away from them, as if afraid he would interrupt something. I assume you have questions, said Shagata finally, looking directly at Carla. I'm right to assume you are some of the children we sent to Earthland back then. Yes. Carla glared at the Exceed. Am I right in assuming you are the old queen of the Exceed? Titles aren't needed anymore. That was all the answer Carla needed. Why were we sent to Earthland? Why were we forced to leave our parents? Why were we lied to? Lied to? Shagata looked honestly confused. Why have you been lied to? Don't act dumb. We were sent to Earthland with a mission to kill the dragon slayers of that world. It was said to be for the good of Extalia. But why? Why did you do it, A mission. Shagata looked down in shame. I see. You must have been so confused, not understanding and all. Not understanding. Shagata shook her head. There was never a mission. What you heard was the lie we spread to the other Exceed to make them part with the eggs. No, what we did was save you all. Carla heard Happy let out a sigh of relief at the mission part, but she was more focused on the saved part. Saved us? What did we need saving from? From this world. Shagata took a sip from her drink, her eyes tracing across the room towards where the young Exceed were sleeping. 3 years ago, 3 years after we sent you all away, our world came crashing down. A single man came up to us one day, walking in the air up to our island home. Shagata let out a laugh, traces of fear in it. Do you know what that was like to us? Such a thing should have been impossible. No human could fly, especially without wings. He went on to tear our city apart, killing all who tried to oppose him. He claimed he was simply getting rid of a false god, and that he would take charge of this world from now on. Couldn't you stop him? Stop him. Shagata let out another laugh. Look around, child. In this house holds the last few Exceed in Edelas apart from one, and he is the only reason so many of us still exist. He gave me time to get some of the younger ones out of the city. Carla spun round to face Miss Doggan. You didn't mention any of this. It wasn't my tale to tell. And I didn't realize so few existed. I thought they went into hiding. Maybe they did, said Shagata. But at least some were saved, and 100 Exceed still exist in Earthland. Our race is preserved, no matter what, and the children are safe there. Shagata raised a paw and placed it against her chest. I was blessed with a rare gift. The power of precognition. I saw all that would happen, and I knew nothing could stop it. Precognition. Happy jumped up in shock. You can see the future? Will I have fish tomorrow? Yes. A large one, cooking with a slight burning on the right side, just the way you like it. Yep, said Happy, his head nodding sagely. She can see the future. And what basis is that with? Carla sighed, ignoring Happy as he went into daydreams of fish. Okay, so I get why you sent us away. But what was our mission about? How did I get that? Because you share the same gift as I do. I can see the future. That was impossible. Carla knew that for certain. How could she have that ability? It had never shown up before. Unless... Well, she had felt a strange sense of déjà vu at times, but she always passed it off as her imagination and being due to a routine. It made a bit more sense now. But where had this gift come from? Magic from Exceed was instinctual, so where had she learned? Her head slowly tilted down to look at herself before looking back at Shagata. Their fur was quite similar. And that feeling she had felt earlier. Could it be? You've realized, haven't you? Shagata smiled at her. Even if I was a queen, I was still a mother. I couldn't not send my own child away too if it meant their safety. You're my mother. Carla said nothing, even as Shagata slowly went round the table and hugged her. All she could think was how warm it felt. She saw Happy looking at her jealously at her as the hug finally ended, only then realizing what Happy was after. Shagata saw the same before she went down and hugged Happy too. You're Lucky and Marl's son, aren't you? Happy froze, hearing the names of the people who had to be his parents. That fur of yours is quite unique, but I'd like to think I could tell all you children apart. It is my responsibility to make sure you all end up safe and sound after all the pain I put your parents through by separating you from them. Shagata smiled at Happy. Your parents loved you very much, even when you were still waiting to hatch. They opposed the fake plan from the start, determined not to lose you. Happy didn't know what to say, Carla slowly approaching as Shagata released him and putting her arms around him, even as Happy finally cried. Whether it was from sadness or happiness, she didn't know. Probably a bit of both. I am glad to have been able to meet you too, Shagata said with a smile. It gives me hope for all the other children. Maybe one day I'll find them all and will be able to be redeemed for my mistakes. At least you two grew up away from the prejudice and arrogance we once had. You two are such sweet children. You said? You said one other exceed existed away from here. Yes. His name is Panther Lily. He bought us the time we needed, but it wasn't very long. I think he got as much as he did because that king grew curious and decided to play a bit first before finishing the fight. He's still around, and he pops in from time to time to see how we are all getting on. He sticks to the front lines though, fighting alongside the other Shebas. So it was the king that destroyed the Exceed? I don't understand how you couldn't have predicted what he would have done. Couldn't precautions have been put in place? Shagata looked at the floor. It's not a matter of that. I knew exactly when we would fall, and how. But I didn't see him in that vision. Or maybe he was in it and I couldn't interpret it properly. All I knew was that we would fail, but we tried anyway. Anything not used in my visions was used, as anything that had been in them had already been shown to have failed. It wasn't enough, I'm afraid. Even Era wasn't fast enough to help us. The king was always going to be beyond your stopping, said Mistoggan simply. If the kingdom couldn't stop him back then, how could you lot? I know that. But we had to try. Shagata sighed once more. Maybe things would have been different if we hadn't been so arrogant. He came because he said he wanted to rid the world of a false god. If we never fabricated that, he may never have come. And Extalia would never have prospered. Mistoggan smiled at her. At least there was a time of peace for you Exceed. And, so long as this event is never forgotten, you'll be fine. And the cost is most of our race. An arrogant one. Panther Lily was too loyal in the end, and that is why you all lived. You were saved by someone you all discarded like dirt for willing saving a human child. For saving me. We all make mistakes, some worse than others. I won't hide from mine, but don't you dare blame any of the others. I willingly took up the mantle. I was the one who created that arrogance. If you want to blame anyone, blame me. Oh, don't worry, I will do. But at least I'll be civil about it. Mistoggan slowly rose before he went for the door. I'll let myself out, don't worry. Shagata nodded at the man before he vanished before turning back to her child and the other Exceed. She had a lot of things to make up for, but for now she'd take that guilt and put it to the side, if just for a moment while she was with her daughter. Just for now, she could try and feel at peace. Protector of the Fairies. Check the description for the links to the author.